Chapter 2279. When they arrived at the entrance of the palace, Wei Weibai lifted her skirt and got off the carriage. From afar, she saw Liemo carrying a bag galloping over. The youth had a murderous and desolate aura, as if he had been wronged. The imperial guards surrounded him, so he couldn't come over. Pulling the reins, he could only sit on the horse and stare blankly at her. Wei Weibai was separated by the crowd. She wore a veil, but there was a pattern drawn between her eyebrows. Beautiful and gorgeous. Her hair was gorgeous and complicated. This was the style of the eldest princess, strong and indifferent. But when she saw him, her expression softened. In the sunlight, her eyes smiled. Her smile was soft and affectionate. Liemo wanted to say something. He wanted to take her away. Or, he wanted to return the box of power to her. But his mind was blank. Only the smile in her eyes was the clearest. Then Wei Weibai shook her head at him. She straightened her posture and walked into the palace step by step. The palace gates closed with a bang, and also closed Liemo's eyes. Liemo rode on the horse in a daze, as if he didn't know what to do. After a long time, he vaguely felt a surge of guilt in his heart. He got too much too easily. All the difficulties and harm were borne by another person. But he was still thinking of how to betray her. This kind of guilt was very strange to him. Because he used unscrupulous means to get something, he felt it was his. Other people's weakness or kindness were things he could use to his advantage. He had never felt guilty along the way. But for the first time, he actually felt this kind of emotion so unbearable. It really hurt. Liemo returned in a daze. Fang Qingyan was already waiting. When he heard that Liemo was riding to the palace, his heart was in his mouth. During this time, Liemo's mood fluctuated greatly. Sometimes Fang Qingyan didn't know what he wanted. In the past, Liemo's goal was clear. Nothing would affect his judgment. He had never wavered. But ever since he seduced the princess, Liemo slowly changed, always doubting himself and wavering. In the past, Liemo wouldn't even say silly things like whether the victim would forgive him or not. But towards the princess, he had a guilty conscience several times. If she forgave him or not. What a silly question. He was too foolish. Liemo returned and gave the box to Fang Qingyan. These will allow me to soar into the sky. Fang Qingyan took out those things and looked at them page by page. She was extremely shocked. These were given to you by the eldest princess? Liemo squatted at the door with his head bowed. Fang Qingyan was silent for a long time before saying, Liemo, if there is one person who loves you, it would be her. It was easy to make use of emotions. A person with a hard heart would always be able to gain an advantage in a relationship. Liemo was a cold-hearted person, but they didn't expect this. He could get so much out of using her feelings. Who was the eldest princess? She was one of the most respected people in the empire. As long as she didn't court death, she could live a life of luxury. Even if the new emperor succeeded the throne, he would not be able to touch her. But for Liemo's sake, she was willing to bear the suspicion of killing her brother, and couldn't bear to say anything bad about him. She was even afraid that she wouldn't be able to escape. Liemo didn't have the capital to settle down, so she transferred all her connections to him. Fang Qingyan could be considered knowledgeable, and had been following Liemo around for the past few years. To make it easier for you to read next time, you can click Save. Chapter 2280. He had seen all kinds of people and experienced all kinds of things. He was the only one with such deep feelings. Seducing the princess was the most successful shortcut for them to obtain the most benefits. Liemo's eyes, which had always been wild and bright, were dull and dull. He squatted and counted ants, not talking to Fang Qingyan. It was as if he didn't need to think about how much he had gained, and how much Wei Weibai would lose. Fang Qingyan couldn't say anything. After all, he had gained all the benefits. If Liemo could think it through, if he kicked the princess away and did it alone, he could use this box to gain the most benefits. There was a long silence. Counselor Fang thought Liemo was still upset. He looked up and was about to comfort him. But he saw Liemo use his finger to draw circles on the ground. Under his fingertips were a few ants. Counselor Fang. After Liemo poked a few ants to death, he felt better. He looked up and his eyes were bright again. It was like a little beast full of energy. I told you the princess likes me very much. Counselor, Yes, she likes you. The youth suddenly showed a bright smile, his eyes curved. So we have to speed up. Otherwise I can't bear it. His words were gentle but still cruel. She's too good, so good that I feel bad. So we have to defeat the eldest prince quickly, make the princess a mere figurehead, and support Bai Ning. At that time, Li Mo's beautiful eyes were covered with a layer of oppressive darkness. I will be good to her. The throbbing and guilt in his heart stimulated his instincts. A moment of soft-heartedness made him more vicious. It was as if this was the only way to hide the restless emotions in the depths of his heart. Fang Qingyun calmly closed the box. It's good that you can think it through. Don't regret it. Li Mo lowered his eyes, pinching the ants with his fingers. He whispered, I won't regret it. It was as if he was convincing himself, but also convincing others. Wei Bai waited for a long time, but there was no notification of favorability. She thought that when Li Mo rushed to the palace gate, his heart must have been moved. In the end, he gave such a good connection to that damned little vixen. That little vixen had obtained power, but her favorability only increased by that little bit? Sure enough, men don't cherish what they have. The emperor's face was incomparably pale. He coughed and said, As long as you hand over the murderer, I will not pursue the matter. The first prince cried out, Father, how could I do that to second brother? Our relationship was so good. If he dies, my heart will break. The emperor. That head was found in your courtyard, and you still dare to say that it's not related? The great prince shouted. Would I be so stupid as to leave the head at home after killing someone? It's all because of some extremely vicious people who want to frame me. When he said extremely vicious, his eyes looked at Bai Weiwei. Weiwei Bai remained calm and didn't say anything. The emperor also shifted his gaze to Weiwei Bai. This daughter of his was the one he loved the most. After all, it was her first child. Moreover, the empress was his true love. If he didn't truly love the empress, no matter how cowardly he was, how could he give all his power to her without any complaints? In addition, Weiwei Bai was young, and because of the palace maid's mistake, her face was burned. He felt even more guilty towards this daughter of his. He didn't want to suspect his daughter from the bottom of his heart about the death of the second prince. Chapter 2281. You can search time transmigration system. Prince Charming, come to Sashu. Come and Baidu to find The eldest prince saw the emperor's expression and felt resentment. Imperial father, sister never got along with second brother. The culprit disappeared in the princess's residence, and sister beat up the soldiers, who came to investigate. He gritted his teeth and said angrily, So you can't be biased. Second brother can't die in peace. The emperor coughed and coughed up blood. Weiwei Bai took the chance to wipe the blood with a handkerchief. Her expression was cold, but her tone had a trace of grievance. I am a girl who broke into the princess's residence in the middle of the night. Shouldn't I punish them? At this point, her eyes showed a trace of sadness. You still think your daughter is ugly. It doesn't matter if the soldiers treat you disrespectfully. Weiwei Bai's disfigurement was the emperor's sore point. The emperor's heart softened at this. Your sister is only a girl. She is soft-hearted, and wouldn't do anything to your second brother. Someone must be framing her. The emperor closed his eyes. He said tiredly, I don't have many days to live. Be quiet before you die. These words were actually directed at the eldest prince. Weiwei Bai felt that the eldest prince's sinister gaze was enough to pierce her heart. But the emperor had nothing to say to the original owner. But the system said that the emperor would die in half a month. In the end, the emperor ordered the eldest prince to investigate the culprit. He also ordered that the culprit be caught within 10 days. The eldest prince said, I want to stab Weiwei Bai to death. Son is worthless, right? You can't afford to offend the imperial father, who values girls over boys. Weiwei Bai safely left the palace, and the eldest prince had to take on the task of finding the culprit. This task wasn't easy to accept. After all, if the culprit was found without any evidence, even the eldest prince would be in trouble. When Weiwei Bai left the palace, there was already a carriage in front of the palace. The coachman was Li Mo. He was dressed in black, and had his hair tied up in a young man's bun. His eyes were clear and bright. He stared at her, and suddenly revealed a cute smile. Your Highness, he called out in a low voice. His tone was tender, as if he cherished it very much. It looked like a sweet cake. Wei Wei Bai stared blankly for a moment before a trace of bashfulness appeared in her eyes. But in the next moment, the worry in his eyes appeared again. When she got into the carriage, her skirts brushed against his back. "Ali, this is a special time. You shouldn't be by my side." Her voice was so soft that only he could hear it. Liemo flicked his whip, and the horse galloped forward. The maidservants who followed the princess didn't even have time to get on the carriage. As the carriage approached the end of the road, the guards following the princess were left far behind. Wei Wei Bai sat in the carriage with the curtains drawn. She looked at the young man's tall and sturdy back. Because he used a lot of strength, she could faintly see the outline of his muscles under his clothes. She felt a little helpless. "Ali, don't be willful." His tone was still so doting and indulgent. Limo's heart was stifled. He threw away the whip, and the carriage continued to move. He had already thrown himself into the carriage and pulled off the girl's veil. Ignoring her cries of alarm, he hugged her tightly. He pressed her into the carriage. He was like a manic little beast, his eyes bright and sharp. In the darkness, his face was filled with tangled madness. "How can you be so good to me?" How could make him so uncomfortable? Wei Wei Bai blinked innocently. Her eyes were sparkling, and her beautiful face had a smile. "Being good to you makes me happy." Liemo saw the deep affection in her eyes, but his heart was heavy. He whispered, "What if I don't love you?" For the convenience of your next reading, you can click on the button below to record this reading record. Chapter 2282. You can search Transmigration System. Adonis come to Sashu. Com in Baidu to find the S. One day, he would be found out. He didn't love her, he lied to her. He even wanted to harm her. Wei Wei Bai stared at him blankly, tears welling up in her eyes. She immediately wiped her tears, her fingernails trembling. "Ali, don't joke about this. I know you have me in your heart." Liemo had long been used to his heartless, ruthless, and selfish nature. But recently, Bai Weiwei had stirred him up day and night, making him extremely uncomfortable. She had turned into an inner demon, forcing him to his death. Liemo felt that he was shameless to the extreme. Shameless wasn't even enough to describe him. He lied to her about his sincerity, yet still hated her for making him suffer. Now he was tormenting her because he felt bad. Seeing her unable to stop her tears, her pretty face was covered by the eyesore of tears. Liemo's long and beautiful eyelashes drooped, pursing his lips and whispering, "I lied to you. I also like you." Wei Wei Bai smiled. This smile was even a bit awkward, but it was much better than crying. Liemo's heart skipped a beat, feeling suffocated, because her happiness dissipated a lot. Only then did he realize he was hugging her. Liemo suddenly let go of her, his ears red. "I'll send you back." He was about to get out of the carriage when a soft body hugged him from behind. His skin started to heat up. Instead, it made her temperature a bit cold. Liemo's originally ferocious and seductive features softened. It was like the melting of ice water. The girl behind him whispered, "Let me hug you. Ali, don't come looking for me in the future. If you are found out, what will happen to me if they harm you?" Liemo pursed his thin red lips, speechless. He also knew that although she was still of value to him, she was still useful. But the current situation was dangerous. His best strategy was, as she said, stay away from her, take the resources she gave, and fight for everything he wanted. But, Liemo pursed his lips, sneering. "Do you dislike me?" The girl behind him didn't say anything. He felt wronged. "You think that I'm a murderer because I killed someone. So you want to cut ties with me. There are many beautiful young men in your backyard. Are you tired of looking at me?" Wei Wei Bai's fingers were a little pale as she hugged him. Liemo only felt her breath become heavier. And then he heard her faint sigh by his ear. "Why would I dislike you? I love you so much." Her voice was soft, like pear candy at the end of autumn. Every word was sweet. "I want to protect you, but I can't bear to part with you." Liemo lowered his head, feeling the warmth of her body. She was scalded by his burning skin. The light in his eyes had a kind of beautiful wolfish nature. "Then I'll look for you again in the future." The girl stiffened and finally said helplessly, "Then come at night. Don't let anyone see you." Liemo smiled and narrowed his eyes. Then he thought of something and said jealously, "Those people in your backyard, tell them to get lost." If not for the fact that he knew that Wei Wei Bai had never touched him before, he would have been in a bad mood. He picked up his sword and wanted to chase them away himself. The girl behind him indulged him without limit. She whispered, "Ali, I'll chase them away when I get back." Liemo could only feel his frustration vanish with every word she said. He softened. He was also overjoyed by her coaxing. To make it easier for you to read next time, you can click Save to record this reading. Chapter 2283. You can search Transmigration System. Adonis, come to search book, www.sashu.com. To find the S. He hummed reservedly. Actually, it's boring to look at them. In this world, there's no one better looking than me. Wei Wei Bai. Yes, she did. This little bastard cheated her of her feelings, cheated her of her power, and planned to cheat her of the title of the world's #1 beauty? Courting death. Liemo seemed to have thought of something as he paused and muttered awkwardly. Actually, in my eyes, you're the most beautiful person in this world. Wei Wei Bai was silent for a moment before bursting into laughter. She buried her face in his firm back. Her laughter was exceptionally cute. Liemo also felt his heart blossom from her laughter. It was as if there was a foreign, unknown emotion that softened his heart. He couldn't help but curve his thin lips, revealing a cute smile. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 60. He felt that this was good. He gained power, and deceived her to be dead set on him. Even if she found out in the future that he had deceived her, she would definitely continue to love him. Liemo had read a lot of scripts. Many women were dead set on their lovers, no matter how they mistreated them or deceived them. In the end, they all had happy endings. So Liemo decided to continue to make Wei Wei Bai love him more. Love to the extreme. Even if he took everything away from her, she would not give up loving him. So Liemo ignored Fang Qingyun's suggestion. After getting the box of connections, he immediately left Wei Wei Bai. Because of this kind of fluke mentality, Liemo went to the princess's residence every few days. Although he still looked like a passionate wolf puppy, but the favorability didn't increase. Wei Wei Bai calmly looked at Liemo's smiling face in the bronze mirror. He lowered his head to comb her hair. Her black hair was like satin. When his fingertips brushed against her hair, it felt exceptionally beautiful. Until he saw the mirror clearly. Wei Wei Bai still had her eyes down, her face flushed. She sighed helplessly. Ali, I'll do it. Liemo put down the comb and hugged her from behind. He rested his face on her shoulder. In the mirror, their faces were somewhat hazy, but it was so beautiful that it was like an irreplaceable scenery. The same kind of infatuation appeared in their eyes. Oh, I'm so good looking. Of course, when Liemo reacted, the princess was even more attractive. Fortunately, her good looks were only for him to see. Liemo finally calmed down. The two little lovebirds whispered sweet nothings to each other. She couldn't wait for the other party to love her to the point of death. The system held the chrysanthemum embroidery in its hands, as it watched this pair of drama queens polluting their love. A girl who only wanted favorability. You are my one and only la 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 la. The man who wanted power to deceive her. I like you the most blah blah blah, the system said. Bah. After being bored for half the night, the young man and woman finally parted reluctantly. However, his favorability was still at 60. Bai Weiwei watched Li Mo's departing figure. She propped up her chin with both hands. Her eyes were calm as she pondered. Only then did she say, without some twists and turns, the favorability won't increase. Li Mo's threshold for sweet nothings was too high. She talked until her mouth was dry and threw out all the young men in the backyard. But the favorability didn't increase at all. That little six clung to the door and refused to leave. She kicked them all away. In the end, it was all in vain. The system said, go on. More torment is good for your body and mind, so you won't get Alzheimer's. Seeing this pair of indifferent adulterous man and woman every day. Chapter 2284. He couldn't even eat his snacks. Torturing her body and torturing her heart was better than these two shameless people chatting awkwardly. Bai Weiwei calmly stroked her chin and thought about it. Well, isn't the first prince still investigating who the murderer is? Let the crown prince know that Li Mo is the murderer. The system was shocked. You're not going to kill the male lead, are you? The crown prince wanted nothing more than to tear the murderer to pieces and feed them to the dogs. You were holding Li Mo's hand. You're my little sweetie. I can't live without you. He just left and you're sending him to his death. You're still a host, but you're even more vicious. Wei Weibai said, it's fine. A beauty saves a coward. If Li Mo doesn't become a coward, how can I save him? System. You're trying to emphasize that you're a beauty. The struggle for power in the court was heating up. As for who killed the second prince, the eldest prince was even more anxious. Because the emperor was clearly biased towards the eldest princess. This aroused the crown prince's hatred. The murderer's sword is very sharp and his killing technique is brilliant. One fatal strike, and his martial arts are very high. Only a few checks were made. After checking and checking, some characteristics were found, but there was no real progress. The crown prince was hopping mad every day, wishing he could find someone to replace him. But this case was being watched by tens of thousands of people. It was unrealistic to just find someone to replace him. Just as he was at his wit's end, a secret report was sent to the crown prince. The crown prince pinched the paper hard after reading it. Keep an eye on the eldest princess residence, especially at night. Li Mo held his face and stared blankly at a cactus flower. Fang Qingyan just got the news from the harem. The emperor's illness worsened, and he couldn't get out of bed. Every day, he was using secret medicine to keep his life. It was only a matter of time before he died. The harem was a secret. By Ning's lowly concubine mother, for her own position. She had already become a spy for Li Mo. And Li Mo's people had already begun to deploy everything. After the death of the second prince, those who belonged to him were either exiled or killed. Almost all of them were scattered. He was waiting to destroy the first prince, and then suppress the princess. When the emperor died, he supported the 3-year-old prince to the throne. There were no objections in the imperial court. What followed next was the battle between the eldest prince and the princess. If the culprit was not caught in the next few days, the first prince would suffer the wrath of the emperor. The fact that the princess was able to escape unscathed was surprising. At first, they thought that this matter would definitely implicate the princess. In the end, the first prince suffered the most. On the contrary, the princess remained calm. If this continued, all the princes with power would be defeated, but the princess would be fine. Once the emperor died, the princess's voice would definitely be the loudest in the imperial court. It would not be their turn to rise to the top. Fang Qingyan felt that she should make a move on the princess, but she did not know what to do with the current situation. The princess was devoted to Li Mo. He felt a little embarrassed to lay his hands on her. What to do? Counselor Fang thought that Li Mo was in a daze, wondering whether to deal with the princess or not. He patted Li Mo's shoulder and sighed. I know your pain. If you still can't do it in the end, then we will support the princess, and let the princess choose the prince. Li Mo came back to his senses and rubbed his face. Last night, I combed the princess's hair. Chapter 2285. Fang Qingyan felt sad. Combing one's hair was something only a married couple would do. Did Li Mo and the princess already secretly promise to be together for life? Li Mo touched his face, frowning and muttering. I took the chance to compare myself with her in the mirror. Sure enough, she is prettier than me. Also, there is a small red mark on her face, making her look more beautiful and delicate. Counselor Fang silently pushed him away, wishing he could pick up the sword on the table. He wanted to kill this unreliable lord with one strike. He was always thinking about how to support the emperor and let him be the regent. He was also sad that Li Mo was going to betray the princess. In the end, this bastard was actually sad that he wasn't as pretty as the princess. Fang Qingyan really went to touch the sword, but that sword was heavy. Li Mo's sword was specially made, 10 times heavier than a normal sword. It couldn't be seen from the outside, but when it came to killing people, it was as clean as cutting vegetables. Thinking of Li Mo's clean cut, Fang Qingyan silently gave up. After Li Mo sighed, he jumped up and said, I'm going on a date with Wei. Today I bought 2 dumplings to eat with Wei. 3 copper coins for 1 dumpling, because of the special buy 1 get 1 free price. So there were just 2. Fang Qingyan was speechless. He hurriedly stopped him. You can't go on like this with the princess. The prince the princess supports is definitely not the little prince. When the time comes, you will definitely clash. Li Mo's footsteps paused. He pursed his lips unnaturally, a thin string hooked on his finger. 2 sweet dumplings were hanging on the string. His finger shook, and the dumplings shook with it. I know. His tone was low, his eyes dim. I decided to sacrifice myself tonight. After sacrificing myself, the princess will definitely be easy to talk to. Counselor Fong. Who can explain what sacrificing oneself means? Is it what he thinks it means? As Li Mo spoke, he suddenly thought of Wei Wei by lying on the bed, her beautiful long hair falling on her thin back. Her charming eyes were like silk, her voice soft. Li. Immediately, Li Mo secretly swallowed, his eyes turning from dim to abnormally spirited. He licked his lips, and the corners of his mouth couldn't help but reveal a smile like a cat that had stolen a fish. She's a woman. I'm too embarrassed to say that she covets me. After that, she'll definitely be obedient to me. When the time comes, I'll test her and ask her to support the little prince with me. Actually, it wasn't a question of who the princess supported. Instead, it was the princess who was powerful. If he didn't kill the princess, in that case, Li Mo would have to see who would sit on the throne in the end. Their plan from the beginning was to seize the princess's power. Instead of letting the princess replace Li Mo to support the little prince, Fang Qingyan felt that Li Mo had gone off track. Right now, the most important thing for him was to go on a date with the princess and compete with her in terms of beauty. Li Mo carried the dumplings and ran away happily. He didn't care about how gloomy his advisor was. Fang Qingyan stood in place, feeling that her master seemed to be quite happy. In the end, he bitterly went back to work at his desk. Forget it, as long as my lord is happy. He was just here to earn a living, so there was no need for him to worry so much. Li Mo gently pushed open the window. He saw Wei Wei by spreading out a piece of paper and writing something. Li Mo sneaked behind her, intending to give her a surprise. But when he glanced around, he saw a complicated web of relationships under her pen. And the one in the middle was actually the third prince. The emperor had 8 children. Chapter 2286. The only princess Wei Wei Bai, the daughter of 3 concubines. Of the 4 remaining princes, the youngest was the 3-year-old Bai Ning. The third prince was the least likely to fight for the throne because his legs were disabled, and he was a cripple. Li Mo frowned, puzzled. Wei Wei Bai sensed something, and turned around to see Li Mo. She smiled. You're here, Ali. She was like a shy girl, never showing the majesty of a princess royal in front of him. Li Mo couldn't help but smile. When his eyes softened, the wildness in them grew stronger. He casually asked, did the third prince offend Wei? Wei Wei Bai pursed her lips and shook her head. Third brother, and I recently decided to work together. Imperial father's health is failing and the eldest prince is unreliable. Li Mo's eyes turned cold at this. Third brother, eldest prince. The difference in terms of address was hard to ignore, but he still put on a beautiful mask. Isn't the third prince disabled? Wei Wei Bai put down her pen and said casually, he's faking it. After all, his other 2 brothers are powerful, and he's afraid of being framed, so he pretended to be disabled. Faking it for 10 years. His mind was exceptionally deep. Li Mo's eyes were deep and he was still smiling. Wei, have you ever thought of supporting the 4th prince? Wei Wei Bai raised an eyebrow in surprise, then smiled. Ali, you don't understand. That child is too young, and I don't have the ambition of my mother. It's not worth supporting him. After she finished speaking, she frowned. Moreover, his mother once poisoned my mother, causing her to lose her vitality after giving birth to me. Because there was no evidence, I could only let her off for now. When Bai Weiwei said this, her tone was already a bit cold. But she thought of something, and her expression turned gentle. Forget it, let's not talk about this. After the third prince takes the throne, there will be a place for Ali. She came back to her senses and smiled sweetly. Commander, do you want to go one step further? When the time comes, I'll ask third brother to give you a few more positions, so that no one will look down on you. These words were both doting and disrespectful. Li Mo's heart sank. Even if she didn't do it on purpose, There was still a natural sense of pride in her spoiling him. Wei Wei Bai didn't seem to notice his inferiority complex. Her fingers gently caressed his face, her fingertips sliding across his lips. Ali is so pretty. Sometimes I want to hide you, but I'm worried that you'll be unhappy. Liemo stared at her in a daze. A beautiful light finally appeared in his deep eyes. He lowered his thick eyelashes. Princesses are pretty too. I want to hide you too. Feelings that begin with deceit. He had let go of some of his sincerity, but he was still hurt by her disrespectful attitude. His heart throbbed with pain. He was so spoiled by her that he forgot that her power was still greater than his. That was why she could casually say that she wanted to deprive him of everything and make him her captive. He should be the one saying this to her. He was even a little hesitant about whether he should discuss with her about supporting the little prince and controlling the court. After all, he was the one who supported her to hold court behind the curtain. And he was still the most doted-on courtier in front of her. He had thought about it before. He was willing to be above everyone and below only one person. That person was her. But Wei Wei Bai's casual attitude made him sober up. He saw the gap between them. Everything he had was because of her power and protection. Chapter 2287. She loved him. If one day she had a change of heart, she could send him away with one word. Liemo thought far ahead, thinking of what little vixen would steal her from him. He found it unbearable. Sure enough, power could only be held in her hands. Only then could he be at ease. The box she gave him could only be used after something happened to her, because the power in the box was loyal to her. But if something happened to her, he could take over. Once he took over, he would do whatever it took to dissolve her power, digesting it into his own. This was his original goal. During this time, he had been coaxed by her gentleness. He couldn't bear to let her love for him disappear. Wei Wei Bai thought he was joking and didn't take it seriously, only glancing at his hand. She teased, "Ollie, do you still give me gifts?" Liemo blushed, looking down and hesitating. Then he took out the dumplings. The small round dumplings were very cute. Liemo bought it because of its good looks. Wei Wei Bai was delighted to see it. So cute. Liemo coughed. Not as cute as you. Wei Wei Bai lightly punched his chest. Not as cute as you. After the two flattered each other, they looked deeply into each other's eyes. They felt like they were close friends. System blarg. This pair of old vixens, I've had enough. The two kissed and kissed for a while before eating the dumplings. Liemo then drew Wei Wei Bai's eyebrows. Her delicate willowy eyebrows made her look even more delicate. He looked at her with deep eyes, thinking she was beautiful everywhere. When he put down the eyebrow pencil, he sat on the dressing table and held her neck, saying hoarsely, "Away!" His lips were about to fall. Suddenly, a timid call came from outside the door. "Your Highness, may I come in?" The youth's voice was soft and pleasant, full of affection. Liemo paused, a trace of hostility flashing in his eyes. It was the middle of the night, and the one outside was obviously the gigolo in her backyard. Didn't she chase them all out? How could there be more? Furthermore, he dared to knock on the door at this time of night. Did he come from a recommendation? Wei Wei Bai's eyelashes fluttered as she realized that she and Liemo were in an ambiguous position. She was a little flustered, and immediately pushed him away. Then she stood up and looked outside. She coldly said, "Little Six, didn't I tell you to scram out of the princess manor?" Little Six stood outside the door and said timidly, I admire the princess, and I'm already the princess's man. Even if I die, I'll be yours." Hearing this, Liemo couldn't help but grin, revealing his white teeth. Wei Wei Bai's voice was cold. "I don't need you. I have no interest in you. Leave this place." Little Six's voice was choked with sobs. "Your Highness, don't drive me away. I can still work even if I eat less. I made some ginseng soup. Can you drink some?" Wei Wei Bai's expression softened. She calmly said, "You can drink the ginseng soup yourself. I'm tired. You can leave." Little Six was touched. "Princess, are you worried that I will sleep late?" "Princess, you also need to rest early. I specially made the ginseng soup for you. How can I drink it?" With that, Little Six placed the soup at the door. "Your Highness, I've put the soup away. If you don't want to drink it, you can just throw it away." With that, Little Six left with sadness and satisfaction. Wei Wei Bai awkwardly turned around. I tried to drive him away, but he wouldn't leave. Liemo coldly smiled, his eyes cold. Oh, your highness is so kind. If you can't drive him away, then don't drive him away. How about I kill him for you? Chapter 2288. Wei Wei Bai smiled helplessly. You're too jealous. He saved me when there was an assassination attempt. How can you repay kindness with enmity? Liemo crossed his arms and looked away, saying sarcastically, Then you're going to abandon me? Wei Wei Bai walked over and hugged him, comforting him. How can I abandon you, my little Li? But he sighed. Liemo heard her sigh. I'm ugly, but he didn't dislike me when he saw my face. He even said I was beautiful. Liemo's body stiffened, his tongue dry. Wei Wei Bai smiled gently and continued. It's rare for someone to say I'm beautiful. I'm also vain, so I didn't chase him away. Liemo's eyelashes drooped, his eyes trembling. He pursed his lips, wanting to say something. He was originally good at lying, but now he was stuttering. He glanced at Wei Wei Bai and breathed heavily, lowering his voice. They all love your power. They are not sincerely praising you. Then he froze. It was so childish. One lie followed by another. He wondered if his brain was eaten by a dog. Wei Wei Bai saw him like this and smiled helplessly. She reached out and tucked her hair behind her ear. Her posture was elegant and beautiful. I know, Li. You don't have to worry about me being taken advantage of. Liemo watched as her fair fingers stroked her ink-black hair. Her eyes twinkled, and a smile appeared on her lips. His heart beat suddenly. He held the edge of the table and whispered with his head down. I'm also afraid that with so many people in your backyard, you'll get tired of me after a while. These words were a bit weak, but there was also a trace of imperceptible darkness. Wei Wei Bai smiled softly and walked in front of him, placing her hand gently on the back of his hand. He removed his fingers from the wooden platform one by one. Then she exhaled softly on his fingertips. Don't be like this, my heart hurts. His words were so plain that it made people's hearts tremble. The crispness in Liemo's eyes was replaced by a deeper emotion. He looked at the girl who felt sorry for him. There was a long silence. Ding! The male lead's favorability is at 65. The sudden increase in favorability caused Wei Wei Bai's smile to deepen. Many a little makes a mickle. Finally, this narcissistic little wolf cub's favorability towards him increased. Someone with Liemo's temperament was absolutely terrifying. Wei Wei Bai felt that it was really hard for her. She always thought that her previous target was abnormal enough. In the end, the next pervert would completely change your imagination. Furthermore, the difficulty of the strategy had never decreased. If it did, he would have to worry about what kind of trap the system would set up, waiting for her to jump. When Liemo left, Wei Wei Bai leaned against the window and stared at him. He turned around and saw the girl's deep and affectionate eyes under the moonlight. He almost stepped on the wrong spot and fell to the ground. When he jumped out of the window, he thought of something and went to her door. He picked up Xiaolu's soup and watered the flowers with the soup before feeling satisfied. After Liemo left, the group of spies guarding the entrance finally saw the young man under the moonlight. Liemo's information immediately appeared on the eldest prince's table. Because the princess's residence was full of good-looking youths coming and going, the princess's reputation for licentiousness went up another level. This was also what the other princes were happy to see. For a long time, no one paid attention to the youths around the princess and who they were. Chapter 2289. Unless he was a spy, Liemo was no different from those teenagers. The only difference was that he had an official position, and a rather high one at that. Among the military officials, this was the highest position. But Liemo was very low-key, taking his position and doing his own work. He never participated in anything. The only thing he was famous for was his face. Delicate, wild, and handsome. If he wasn't so low-key, he could have made a name for himself with his looks. He could become a girl's dream lover or something. When the crown prince saw the letter accusing Liemo of being a murderer, he was skeptical, but still sent someone to guard the princess' residence. He found that Liemo was meeting with the princess in the middle of the night. Liemo's martial arts were high, and he definitely had the ability to kill the second prince. At the crucial moment, he hid in the princess residence. That night, the eldest princess refused to search the residence. Liemo meeting with the princess. A series of clues were connected. The crown prince's eyes were malicious. Was it really Liemo? And the mastermind was the eldest princess? Why was the empress a nightmare for all the princes when she was alive? The eldest princess's position was unshakable. They were princes, but when they saw their eldest sister, they still had to bow. The crown prince hated the fact that he was born first, and should have been the crown prince. But because of the empress's simple words, the emperor agreed not to make him the crown prince. Because the crown prince's existence would make the princess uncomfortable. This palace existed for Wei Bai. Now that the empress was dead, Wei Bai still wanted to kill them, to be the empress? The crown prince's eyes turned red at this thought. He hated her to the core. Capture Liemo and bring him here for torture. Even if Liemo wasn't the murderer, he was Wei Bai's new favorite, and must know something. In this battle for the throne, it was either you die or I live. Since Wei Bai dared to block the road, he wouldn't be polite. Liemo returned from the princess residence. When he was changing, he suddenly felt that he had let go of too many feelings for her. As if he was addicted. He was mesmerized by her tenderness and love. Liemo calmly thought for a long time, but still couldn't suppress his urge to get close to Wei Bai. After changing his clothes, he came out. A rooster crowed. This was the time when Fang Qingyan woke up. He came out to wash his face. He saw Liemo brandishing his sword with a murderous aura. Who provoked this old man again? She was unhappy, and fierce all the time. She didn't know how he made the eldest princess so devoted to him. Could it be that he really relied on his face? Fang Qingyan shuddered at the thought of this. She felt that she was about to be brainwashed by Liemo's beauty. After Liemo finished chopping the plants in the yard, he finally stabbed his sword into the ground. Then he squatted by the sword and looked up at the sky at a 45-degree angle. The angle at which the handsome young man was looking up at just happened to show his own appearance. Counselor Fang secretly planned to leave, but before he could even take half a step forward, Liemo said coldly, "Awei wants to support the third prince." Advisor Fang was stunned, but said, "He's not a cripple?" Liemo sneered, "It's fake." Counselor Fang frowned, "He's so gloomy. How can he be so good at pretending?" Liemo was tired of squatting and sat on the ground. He smiled and said, "Do you remember when I said that I lived at home when I was young?" Fang Qingyan was silent for a moment before nodding. "Yes, I know." Chapter 2290. Liemo sneered. "At that time, my family was just a small farmer. The palace suddenly sent a decree that the third prince fell off his horse and was in imminent danger." Fang Qingyan had a quick mind and a photographic memory. Thinking about it, he finally remembered that the third prince was crippled at that time, and the palace did send a decree. The decree was for everyone to pray for the third prince. This decree was a bit of a big deal, but because he was a prince, no one said anything. And it wasn't too much. Liemo's eyes were gloomy. "Do you know how my village prayed for blessings?" Fang Qingyan shook his head. He knew Liemo didn't have a good childhood, and heard some small things from him. He also found it unbearable and absurd. But he didn't know what he went through. Liemo's eyes were gloomy. "It's substitute praying." The ancestral hall of the village used this ancient method of praying for blessings to curry favor with the local officials. Fang Qingyan asked, "Substitute?" Liemo turned to look at him, his eyes dark and gloomy. He smiled and it was very creepy. Substitute is to make a child kneel in the ancestral hall every day and be whipped 50 times without receiving treatment. Fang Qingyan frowned. Liemo reached out and started to pull the grass. This praying is said to share the third prince's burden. If other children suffer, the gods will let the third prince go. Fang Qingyan asked, "You were one of them?" Liemo sneered. "Of course. Because there was no treatment, many children died, and then it was my turn." Day after day, he was whipped in despair. Every day, he was a bloody mess, kneeling in the ancestral hall. He couldn't rest, couldn't receive treatment. If he fell, he would be dragged down because he was unlucky. If he didn't die the next day, he would continue to be tortured. This was the substitute praying for blessings. Using the child's life to pray for a completely useless blessing. It was just to curry favor with the higher-ups and get benefits. In the end, they really did get benefits. Lee Mo was the child who persevered to the end and didn't die. So his family was rewarded. From being a landlord, he had become a small official. Lee Mo's voice was low and sinister. At that time, if the palace had even the slightest bit of sympathy, they would not have allowed praying for blessings to kill so many people. The palace knew about their blessing ceremony. He was actually encouraging him and saying good. This made things worse in the village. To obtain rewards, everyone became terrifying demons. Li Mo looked at Fang Qingyan with a cold smile. When I found out that the third prince was still crippled when he woke up, I was really happy. Because of that evil prince who had killed so many people. He was still crippled. This was retribution. Li Mo stood up and pulled out his sword. But it was all an act. I almost died while praying for blessings. I worked so hard to climb to such a high position just to kill him. The human heart is cold, killing innocent people for profit. In this world, he had already seen clearly that if he didn't want to become fish meat, then he could only be at the top. His starting point was too low. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't overturn everything and sit on the throne. But he had the power to be above everyone. Li Mo lowered his eyes and whispered, I like the princess very much, but power is my only goal. He didn't want to be alone and bear the evil of this world. He didn't want to suddenly become fish meat one day. Chapter 2291. You can search Transmigration System. Adonis come to Sashu. Com, in Baidu to find the S. He was whipped by others and used by others. Weiwei gave him a lot of love a lot. But would she love him like this for the rest of his life? What if her life was in danger? Or she gave up everything to love him? Li Mo's eyelashes trembled as he smiled. He gripped the sword in his hand. Who knows? It was better to hold on to power, and then hold on to her. Fang Qingyan didn't try to persuade him. It was fine as long as Li Mo didn't regret it. Besides, the Princess Royal supported the third prince to start a conflict with Li Mo. They were about to return to the room. Suddenly, the door was smashed open, and a group of imperial guards rushed in. Sinner Li Mo, having an affair with the princess and murdering the prince. Here is the arrest warrant. As soon as he finished, the imperial guards rushed over, took Li Mo's sword and hung it on him. Fang Qingyan was about to stop them. Li Mo stopped her with an indifferent and calm look. Fang Qingyan immediately understood. He was scheming outside to save Li Mo, and not fallen together. So Fang Qingyan pretended to be scared, immediately cowering in front of the imperial guards and bowing. A cowardly look. The imperial guards didn't want to complicate matters, and immediately left after arresting her. Fang Qingyan looked up and straightened her sleeves. Then she turned to the guard in the dark and said, Call all the advisors. Something happened to the Lord. Li Mo had a bunch of advisors. Fang Qingyan was the head of the advisors. They usually did their own thing. They only gathered at the crucial moment. Weiwei was eating a sesame seed cake with the system, watching Naja make a scene. They were discussing the anime's plot with relish. Then the system suddenly said, The male lead has been caught, hung up and tortured. His clothes have been taken off. Why did it emphasize that his clothes were taken off? Weiwei almost choked on her sesame seed cake. She jumped up. Go save him now. Another wave of affection. She had read most of Li Mo's information. She probably knew that Li Mo had suffered as a child, so he was very greedy for power. Li Mo's favorability towards her didn't increase at all with her sweet talk. It was because Li Mo didn't believe what was said. He only believed what he saw. Weiwei could only create an opportunity to inform the crown prince that Li Mo was the murderer. She wanted the first prince to capture him, and then her savior would appear and risk everything to save him. Only then would Li Mo believe her feelings. Once he believed it, his favorability towards him would increase rapidly. Weiwei calmly planned to increase Ali's favorability. Then he sighed. Power is still the best. Look at how powerful I am. I can save a beauty just because I want to. Life in this plane is so good. Words from the bottom of his heart. Look at Li Mo. He didn't like her at first, but still tried to seduce her. It was all thanks to power and influence. Are you tired of beauty and now you like power? She thought of Li Mo. the one who licked his own face with a mirror. When he stopped licking his own face, he became greedy for power and profit every day. He suddenly felt that it was natural for her favorability to rise quickly. These two fellows were simply a match made in heaven, shameless and black-hearted. Mutual sympathy, the favorability would definitely increase. Liemo was hung up by everyone. His shirt was ripped open and stained with blood. Whips kept falling on his body. The first prince asked sinisterly, "My second brother was killed by you. You colluded with the eldest princess and plotted against him." Liemo endured the pain and didn't speak. Being hung up and beaten by the first prince was indeed an accident. Usually when he killed someone he hid it well. Except when he went to the eldest princess' residence and stayed for too long, and the eldest princess knew he was the murderer. It was impossible for anyone to think it was him. Could it be? Away. Chapter 2292. Once this thought appeared, his heart felt like it was being cut by a knife. There was a piercing pain in his heart. Liemo's mouth tasted of blood as he grinned. Was she tired of playing with him? Or was she forced into a corner by the crown prince and wanted to sacrifice him? All sorts of schemes flashed through Liemo's mind, but he couldn't help thinking. Perhaps there was a flaw somewhere else? As he pondered, the whip landed on his body. The pain made him muddle-headed. He recalled how she was still looking at him from the window when he left last night. She loved him. He knew that even a blind person could see that kind of love and pampering. But wasn't there still that little six? The one who drove everyone away was that little bitch. It was impossible for him to be wholeheartedly devoted to her. When Liemo was whispering sweet nothings to Wei Wei Bai, he also said that she was his one and only. But he didn't believe it. Human nature was selfish. She could sacrifice for him for a while, but not for a lifetime. Liemo clenched his teeth. All sorts of schemes going through his mind. In the end he clenched his teeth and didn't speak. The crown prince only suspected that if he made a promise, he would die here. The crown prince saw his stubbornness and didn't say a word. He gave a cold laugh. Good, even a dog by the eldest princess' side is so stubborn. You're willing to risk your life for her. So how could she give you the same feelings? Keep dreaming, you lowly trash, a third-rate boy toy. Liemo had been motionless until he heard this. He finally looked up, his eyes filled with blood. Incomparably ferocious. The crown prince wanted to provoke him, make him hate Wei Wei Bai. Only then could he implicate Wei Wei Bai. There had to be a murderer for the second prince's death. Wei Wei Bai was the best. Otherwise, when he became emperor in the future, he would have a rival like Wei Wei Bai. Just thinking about it made him angry. Who do you think you are? She just wants you to help her kill someone. Can she really love you forever? What is your status? You're dirty and trash, just trash to be used. No, she liked him. She loved him dearly. Knowing that he had killed the second prince, he immediately asked him to flee. She never used him. Liemo clenched his teeth and bit his lip. Blood dripped to the ground. The ground was stained with his blood. The eldest princess' status is so noble, and her actions are even more absurd. Even if she has an affair with you, it's just to pass time. The first prince scolded coldly. He wanted to suppress Liemo's feelings. He thought that Liemo was so loyal to the eldest princess because he liked her. Although he didn't know what was so good about his ugly elder sister. He didn't know why he liked her. But to make Liemo give up, Liemo might hate Wei Wei Bai to death. Even if it wasn't Wei Wei Bai who killed him, Liemo wouldn't let her go. When the time came, he would definitely be happy to see them fighting each other. The eldest prince continued to scold. Who doesn't know what the eldest princess is like? She can spoil someone to the heavens, but once she doesn't like you, you're just a dirty bug. She won't even look at you. As he cursed, he ordered his men to beat Liemo. You're such a lowly person, yet you still think that she'll love you forever. She's just looking for something new. Each sentence hit Liemo's heart. He knew that this was the first prince's psychological attack, but it revealed Liemo's dark uneasiness. Liemo knew that Wei Wei Bai liked him and gave him a lot. But he was always careful, not daring to think too deeply, because he felt that he wasn't worthy. This feeling of inferiority came from the bottom of his heart. He didn't do anything. Just based on his face, she liked him that much? To make it easier for you to read next time. You can click save below to record this reading. Next time you open the bookshelf, you'll see it. If you like. Chapter 2293. If not for his face. Then he hadn't done anything that could make Bai Weiwei fall deeply in love with him. Then why did she like him so much? This suspicion made him irritable. But when she wanted to see him, he still happily ran to meet her in private. What if it was just something new? Li Mo's eyes were filled with hostility. He lowered his head, not saying a word. After the crown prince scolded him, he added, "If she really liked you, she would have saved you long ago." Li Mo stiffened, pursing his lips. He slowly looked up. Under his messy hair, his eyes were like a wolf's as he stared at the crown prince viciously. The crown prince felt a chill run down his spine and slapped the table. "Someone come beat him to death. I don't care if he dies." The whip lashed at him. Li Mo groaned. He could endure the pain, but the crown prince's words were unbearable. He almost wanted to disregard the plan and break the chains to kill the crown prince. Fang Qingyan should be ready. There should also be impeachment reports in the court. To wash away the suspicion of killing the enemy, the first prince tortured innocent people and even framed the eldest princess. He always had a backup plan. He wouldn't completely cut off his escape route and really let Bai Weiwei come to save him. Li Mo thought coldly. She didn't save me this time, did she? So he would take her power in the future. That was the right choice. But Li Mo's expression turned aggrieved. "Where's little Ollie? I'm about to be tortured to death, and she doesn't come to see me." Sure enough, there's a newcomer. The crown prince stared at Li Mo, refusing to open his mouth even if he was beaten to death. He was angry and suddenly picked up the soldering iron, about to brand Li Mo's chest. The soldering iron had yet to reach Li Mo's chest. Li Mo suddenly curled his lips and looked at the crown prince sinisterly. People of the imperial family were always so cruel and heartless. Compared to them, his ruthlessness was not even 1 in 100,000. When the first prince saw the look in his eyes, the soldering iron in his hand trembled, and he almost burned himself. He roared angrily, "Lowly person, you actually dared to look directly at a prince. You deserve to die." As soon as he finished speaking, suddenly, a cold and clear shout rang out. This consort didn't know that imperial younger brother could be so righteous when torturing innocent people like this. These words caused Li Mo to look up blankly. At the entrance of a dark cell, a slender and noble figure appeared. Li Mo stared at her, as if he was looking at an unbelievable scene. However, he saw her faintly raise her eyes to look at him. A trace of fluctuation flashed through her eyes, but it was concealed again. The crown prince was shocked. "Imperial sister." Weiwei Bai walked over and slapped him. "This is simply preposterous. Capturing an innocent person and forcing them to confess under torture. Tomorrow, this consort will immediately enter the palace and report you." After being slapped in the face, the first prince stared blankly for a moment before exploding with rage. "He is the murderer. You rushed here to save him because you have a guilty conscience. Second brother's death was ordered by you." Weiwei Bai ignored him and ordered the people following her to untie Li Mo's chains. Li Mo's eyes hidden behind his black hair stared motionlessly at Weiwei Bai. Her back was to him, blocking the light, but she protected him. Li Mo stared blankly at her back. He felt the pain in his chest melt away because of her arrival. Weiwei Bai raised an eyebrow. "It seems that imperial younger brother is the one with a guilty conscience. If you don't give this consort an explanation when we enter the palace tomorrow, this matter will not be over." To facilitate your next reading, you can click Save at the bottom to record this reading. Chapter 2294. The girl was thin, but she was stronger than anyone else. She was cold and noble, her tone neither fast nor slow. Li Mo was held up and couldn't stand. Blood flowed to the ground in front of him as he moved. Weiwei Bai's white dress was dyed red by his blood. It was beautiful yet mournful. Li Mo looked down, his heart beating fast. The crown prince was still questioning. "What's your relationship with him? Is it worth it for you to come all the way to my prison to get him out?" Weiwei Bai was silent, then finally opened her mouth. "What relationship? He's mine." With that, she waved her sleeve. "If you dare to stop me again, I'll kill you." After saying that, Weiwei Bai felt moved. Look at this domineering aura. It made people feel proud. Wei Wei Bai asked. Is Liemo looking at me with admiration? Am I very handsome? The system turned to look at Limo's gloomy eyes, his ghastly face, his body covered in blood. He looked like an evil spirit that crawled out of hell. There was no admiration, but his eyes looked like he wanted to eat the host. The system said, if you say so. Wei Wei Bai sighed. That's why when a beauty saves a cowardly bear, the cowardly bear will be grateful. The crown prince was afraid of Wei Wei Bai's power and the emperor's protection. Wei Wei Bai waved her hand and took Liemo away. Limo's eyes never left her from start to finish. Bai Weiwei finished snatching people and brought Liemo back to the Princess Fu. Limo's face was pale as blood flowed all over his body. The imperial physician hurriedly rushed over and changed countless bandages for him. Before he finally stopped the bleeding, people came and went. Bai Weiwei sat on the edge of the bed, holding his fingers in a death grip. When the wound was treated, it was already late at night. Wei Wei Bai personally used a wet handkerchief to wipe his forehead. He had a high fever. She barely spoke, but her eyes were filled with grief. Liemo stared at her blankly. Suddenly he said, If you save me like this, you'll be implicated. Wei Wei Bai barged in and took him away without a care. The first prince would definitely retaliate. Tomorrow, when they entered the palace, Wei Wei Bai would not be able to gain anything. Wei Wei Bai had already dismissed the servants. She slowly took off her veil. Under the flickering candlelight, the girl's stunning face appeared. Her face was full of frost. Implicate? I'm just afraid that I can't save you. What's there to be afraid of? Just as she finished speaking, the girl's frosty expression suddenly crumbled. She pursed her lips and clenched her jaw. Finally, a sob escaped from the depths of her throat. Does it hurt? Tears welled up in her eyes. Her previous strength seemed to be an act, and this extremely fragile girl was her true form. Limo's eyes twitched, and he suddenly felt his eyes sting. It hurts. Afraid that she wouldn't believe him, he suddenly started crying as well. Away, it hurt so much. Bai Weiwei held his hand and leaned her face against the back of his hand. It's all my fault. I wanted to protect you, but I pushed you into such a dangerous situation. Her tears fell onto the back of his hand. Limo's breath caught, and he felt even more wronged. This feeling of being loved to the bone. It was too sweet, too good. His face was bright red because of his high fever. His eyes were moist, filled with innocence and grievance. His voice was weak. Away, they hurt me. Wei Wei Bai paused, her lips trembling. Finally she sighed. It won't happen again. I won't let anyone hurt you. Chapter 2295. Liemo looked at him with wide eyes. Really? Wei Wei Bai nodded seriously. Really? Liemo looked at the girl under the light with a serious expression. It was as if this promise was more important than anything else. Liemo moved his lips, trying to act coquettishly, but he couldn't say any sweet nothings. She was really here to save him. This thought almost destroyed the firm and cold defense in his heart. He lowered his eyes, moved her hand to his lips, and gently planted a kiss. Ding! The male lead's favorability is at 70. Wei Wei Bai saw Liemo fall asleep peacefully. She then said to the system, I finally pried open this little minx's heart. He said sweet nothings to her every day, causing her favorability to rise like a difficult labor. Now that she was here to save him, she finally saw some sincerity in this little minx's eyes. The system said, he still has 30 favorability. Do you want to save him a few more times? Wei Wei Bai waved her hand. That's not new. Next, of course, I want the little beauty and not the country. She wanted Limo to see that she wanted to work with the third prince. She also told him that she couldn't get along with the fourth prince. It wasn't as if she and the system didn't know Liemo was secretly supporting the fourth prince. So when the time comes, I will hug him heartbreakingly and say that for him, I will give up my power and support the fourth prince with him. Bai Weiwei said, beaming with joy. It would be strange if Liemo wasn't moved. I gave up supporting the third prince for him. Torture, torture. System. Wei Wei Bai said. With this torture, the atmosphere of the country and beauty will come. Liemo will know how much I've sacrificed. I guarantee that his favorability will rise immediately. System. The earth could no longer stop this little minx's host from going crazy. Wei Wei Bai held her forehead. Sigh. That little minx Liemo is really a troublemaker. I've spoiled him so much, and he's still not satisfied. System. Wei Wei Bai said. Oh right, I almost forgot. Send the key evidence of Liemo being the murderer to the crown prince. What are you doing? Wei Wei Bai said. This way Liemo is the murderer. The whole world wants to harm him. But I'm the only one protecting him. The system gave Liemo a sympathetic look. The host has already graduated from the strategy. This move is insidious and vicious. Liemo was such a vicious person. But in front of the host, he seemed so pure and innocent. Wei Wei Bai planned as she rested her face on her hand and closed her eyes to take a nap. Liemo, on the other hand, was in a daze from the fever, but he would still wake up. Then he saw Wei Wei Bai guarding him. She closed her eyes and fell asleep tiredly. However, she still refused to leave him. Liemo's eyes were filled with satisfaction. Finally, he reached out and tugged at her sleeve. If only she could love him like this for the rest of her life. With this thought in mind, Liemo actually felt that the taste of power was not as good as this. He stared at her for a long time before finally falling asleep. The next day, when Liemo woke up, he heard Wei Wei Bai's cold voice. Serve me well and strengthen the guards. Without my token, no one is allowed to enter. He looked over. He saw that Bai Weiwei was being served by someone to get dressed. The princess dress was gorgeous. Even if her body was thin, her cold aura made people tremble. Liemo saw her turn around and immediately closed his eyes. But he heard the rustling of clothes. Then a soft kiss fell on his cheek. She whispered softly, "The fever is gone." Chapter 2296. Liemo's face reddened at her words. Fortunately, Wei Wei Bai was in a hurry to enter the palace and didn't notice anything wrong with him. Only after Wei Wei Bai left did he struggle to get up. His eyes were cold and calm as he pondered. How should he continue on this path of seizing power? At this point, all of his power and influence was on the fourth prince. He couldn't stop. If Wei Wei Bai found out that the person he supported was the fourth prince she didn't like, would she hate him? Liemo shuddered. In the past, when he thought of this question, he could think of it coldly. If she wasn't convinced, he would lock her up. But today, when he thought of it, he felt terrible. It was much more unbearable than ever before. Liemo couldn't help but curl up, but it tore his wound, causing him to grit his teeth in pain. Almost instinctively, he turned around and acted like a spoiled child. Only then did he realize that Wei Wei Bai had entered the palace. He stared at the door for a while, then turned around and puffed up his face, silently enduring the pain. After enduring for a while, he fell asleep. But when he woke up, he found that Wei Wei Bai wasn't back yet. Liemo looked at the candlelight outside. She had been gone for an entire day. He was in a daze for a while. Then his eyes gradually became clear. His heart was also a little more flustered. Did something happen to Wei Wei Bai? He immediately got up, ignoring his wound, wanting to get off the bed. But there was a commotion outside the door. Wei Wei Bai was back. She entered with a cold and flustered expression. Ali, leave this place immediately. I will have someone send you out of the city. Liemo's eyes narrowed, his voice sinking. What's wrong? Wei Wei Bai bit her lip, her voice trembling. Did you leave something behind when you killed them? Liemo. What did he leave behind? How could that be? He wouldn't leave behind anything that represented his identity. Wei Wei Bai took a deep breath and then said slowly. Today, when I entered the palace to confront the great prince, the investigating official beside him took out the official badge you left at the scene. Liemo's official position had a token that represented his identity. However, he would be an idiot to stuff this token into his pocket to kill someone. Liemo said coldly, impossible. Wei Wei Bai said, I know it's impossible. It's a framing, but Imperial Father is tired of our scheming, and you will become the scapegoat. Liemo finally understood why Wei Wei Bai was so scared. The emperor didn't want to see his children killing each other. Therefore, the case of the second prince's death had to be quickly closed. Even if he had to find a scapegoat, although he had killed the second prince, no one knew about it. Except for the princess. He stared into her eyes, but found no other emotions in them other than worry and sadness. She would not betray him. For some reason, this thought made his body relax. Emperors, princes, these things were still so vicious. Even if there was no direct evidence to prove that he was the murderer. However, the first prince had even stolen his official badge. The emperor would definitely settle this matter carelessly. Wei Bai said coldly. I didn't think Imperial Father would directly convict you. They are coming to arrest you. Come with me immediately. Liemo was in a daze as she pulled him out of the door. There was a carriage outside. Wei Bai stuffed Liemo into the carriage and followed. Then she reached out her hands and hugged him, worried that his wound would hurt the floor of the carriage. Chapter 2297. Limeau's face was leaning on her, the warmth of her touch keeping him in a daze. While the carriage was moving forward, Liemo finally heard his own incredulous voice. You want to elope with me? This thought had kept him in a daze since just now, because it was too inconceivable. Wei Bai's hand on his back paused, hesitating for a long time before saying, I can't go with you. Limeau's excited eyes immediately cooled. Wei Bai hurriedly explained, if I leave, who will clear your name? In the future. In the future what? She kept the rest of her words in her mouth, but no one could hear her clearly. Limeau's heart full of warmth turned cold. He coldly pursed his lips. So you're abandoning me? Wei Bai said gloomily. It's only a temporary departure. Imperial Father clearly wants to use you as a scapegoat. His health is deteriorating. If he was healthy, he would definitely continue to investigate. And continue to investigate. As time passed, the culprit might not be found. And no one would guess it was Liemo. The coldness in Limeau's eyes turned vicious. Away, His Majesty's health is not good. I previously obtained a pill that can bring the dead back to life. I originally wanted to use this pill to ask for His Majesty's grace. Wei Bai's fingers trembled, looking down at him. A pill that can bring the dead back to life? Like hell I'll believe you. You're holding on to this thing, and you're willing to take it out? Liemo pulled out an ugly smile, his eyes turning gentle, hiding the coldness in his eyes. Yes, I wanted to use this pill to marry you. Saying so, he shyly said. Wei Bai also blushed, her eyes shining brightly. Liemo forced a smile. But I won't have the chance to offer this pill. Wei Bai paused, also feeling sad. She seriously promised. Trust me, I'll take you back when I'm done with this matter, okay? Liemo knew she meant it. But he didn't believe her. The royal family was rotten. And these people were used to being selfish. Wei Bai was also one of them. She only liked him now, and coveted his youth and fresh looks. Now that she was emotional, of course, she felt that he was good. But once he left, he gave up all his power. She had placed all her hopes on her promise. Was he just going to wait for her to pick him up? Liemo smirked. He didn't want it. Because who knew if she would forget him as time went by? Limeau's heart was filled with dark schemes. But his smile was pure and innocent. Away, I believe you. Then he took out the medicine from his sleeve, and placed it on her palm. Give the medicine to the emperor to prolong his life, so that he has the energy to continue investigating. Then, I will be able to clear my name. Except for Wei Bai. No one knew who killed the second prince. The first prince couldn't do it either, because he had no evidence. The so-called identity tag was either stolen or forged. If the emperor really wanted to investigate, he wouldn't be able to trace it back to him. Wei Bai was convinced by his reasoning. All right, I will go to the palace tomorrow, and give the medicine to Imperial Father. Liemo shook his head. They won't believe you. Also, the emperor can't wait that long since we can't figure out the composition of the pill. Wei Bai frowned, not knowing what to do. Liemo said seductively. You can secretly give it to him. When the emperor recovers, you can say I gave it to him. / to make it easier for you to read it next time. You can click save below to record this reading. Chapter 2298. Wei Bai looked at him hesitantly. Liemo smiled, slowly reaching out to hold her face. His deep voice contained a smile, like a seductive vixen. Believe me, Wei, why would I harm you? Wei Bai's hesitation disappeared, her eyes filled with infatuation. Liemo felt like he was an enchantress. He nervously licked his thin lips. There was no turning back. Just think of it as a great achievement for me. As long as I succeed, I can get rid of the suspicion of murder and return to your side. Wei Wei Bai was moved, her eyes filled with hope. Liemo smiled even more beautifully, knowing he had succeeded. Wei, you hope I can return to your side soon. Wei Wei Bai immediately nodded, holding the pill tightly. I will go to the palace tomorrow, and let you come back. Liemo breathed a sigh of relief. But another sharp feeling took hold of his heart. He looked away, not wanting to see the trust in her eyes. As if mocking, he responded in a low voice. Yes, quickly return to your side. Using the identity of a loser to send you away. Then like a stray dog ask you to call me back. Liemo knew what he was doing. The pill was poison. Once it was eaten, death would follow. Once the emperor died, he immediately led the 10,000 soldiers, hidden outside the palace, into the palace. The imperial guards would not be able to react that quickly. And he had been preparing for so many years, enduring for so long. No one had planned the war for the throne earlier than him. The only difficulty was the emperor's death. At first, he lured the princess, making her fight among herself, making the princes turn against each other. Finally, he found a scapegoat and stuffed the pill into the emperor's mouth. Then he could directly enter the palace and help the fourth prince ascend the throne, slaughter the rest of the princes. In the future, this world would be his. Wei Wei Bai got off the carriage halfway. She wore a veil and held the glass lamp as she watched him leave. Liemo looked at her from afar. Her petite and frail figure was lonely under the light. It was just like when she sent him away and gave him the glazed lamp. She said, Ollie, I won't let you fall. Perhaps from then on, his heart had been biased towards her. He had even considered giving up on the plan and not letting her be the scapegoat who poisoned the old emperor. But Li Mo's fingers clenched the curtain of the carriage. The wounds on his body were in great pain. But her power was too great. She could not be betrayed by her friends and family and be accused of a crime. Then, if she refused the fourth prince's ascension to the throne, in that case, he might not be able to defeat her even with the power of the imperial court. If she had been willing to abandon everything, leave with him, elope with him, Liemo swore that he could also give up everything. But he smiled, but his smile was twisted and stiff. In the end, he buried his head in his knees and said in a trembling voice, Wei Wei Bai, I don't believe that you'll like me for a lifetime. You have too many choices, so I'm taking them all away from you. Later she would become a sinner. He was a prisoner. In that case, she would have no choice. All she could get and see was him. Wei Wei Bai held the box of pills, her face full of bitterness and hatred. 70 favorability is so vicious. What kind of sick pervert is this? 70 favorability was a very deep affection. Although it was not to the extent of swearing an oath of eternal love, it was not to the extent of killing her. The system said, he probably thinks that you're a heartless person if you don't elope with him. Download the https://m/sashu.com button at the bottom to record your reading record. Chapter 2299. She did not see the moment Liemo heard that Wei Wei Bai was not going with him. That look tsk was so sinister and scary. Wei Wei Bai said, Am I not reacting to the situation? If I agree to elope with him, the most I'll gain is 5 points of affection. How am I going to farm more in the future? She just wanted to reject him. Then after 2 days of hesitation, she came to her senses and chased after Liemo. At that time, she did not believe that Liemo would gain 5 points of affection. At least 10 points. But when Liemo heard that she was not going to elope, he gave her poison and told her to poison the old emperor to death. Was this something a human would do? System said, You want to poison the old emperor to show your trust and affection for him? Wei Wei Bai held the box tightly and frowned. The old emperor was good to the original owner and was biased towards me. He's about to die and I want to poison him before he dies. This is not right. System was shocked. Host actually thinks that doing bad things is not right? Does host still have morals? By Wei Wei, we can't do such a deranged thing for the sake of favorability. System said, Please say something more humane. Wei Wei Bai said, Oh, you think I'm stupid? If I really kill the emperor, I'll be a prisoner in the next moment. How am I going to spoil Liemo? Liemo's plan was to bring disaster to the country and its people. He wanted to make her lose her power. and then it would be his turn to kill her. This evil and cute fox spirit. Wei Wei Bai held the box tightly. Pretend to trust Li Mo, and go to the palace to see the old emperor. But just don't let him eat the pill. After all, once the old emperor died, everyone would rebel. Li Mo had been waiting for a rebellion for years. She was waiting for Li Mo to eat and drink. If that happened, destroying this place would not be beneficial to the strategy. So Bai Weiwei leisurely entered the palace. The result was that she didn't have to say anything. The old emperor wanted to be alone, and talked to Weiwei Bai. Weiwei Bai took it as a form of consolation for the old man. The old emperor was in tears. Weiwei, I dreamt of your mother last night. She still resents me for not being able to be with her for the rest of my life. But I still love her the most. You don't even talk about it anymore. So I. The old emperor was truly guilty. He was guilty of giving birth to so many children. Weiwei Bai felt that he was as bad as her. The old emperor said a lot of things, and he seemed to be in high spirits. Bai Weiwei hummed nonstop and secretly yawned a few times. She was relieved to see the old emperor so energetic. If she really listened to Li Mo's scheming princess, and sent the old emperor to the afterlife, her position would be ruined. Finally the old emperor sighed. I feel much better today. Why do I feel a little thirsty? Weiwei Bai. We've been talking for 2 hours. If you're not thirsty, who is? With a caring attitude, she brought him a cup of water. Have some, imperial father. Only by living a little longer could he be her backer. She saw clearly that half of the eldest princess's position came from the former empress's connections. The other half came from the old emperor's favoritism. She saved Li Mo, and the old emperor didn't say anything. The eldest prince flew into a rage, but he couldn't make the old emperor punish Weiwei Bai. Although the old emperor had many children, the only cinnabar mole in his heart was still the empress. So when the empress stole his power, he didn't care if he was seen as a weak and incompetent man. Weiwei Bai was still thinking about the old emperor, and the empress's love and hatred. Transmigration system. Adonis, come here. 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 Chapter 2300. Suddenly, he heard Hihi's voice. She looked up and saw the old emperor clutching his neck, the cup in his hand falling to the ground. Then, the old emperor's eyes turned red. He opened his mouth and flopped around like a drowning fish. He was dead, choked to death by water. Weiwei Bai. You poisoned it? Bai Weiwei. Am I the kind of person who poisons people? After Weiwei Bai said this, she also felt that it was wrong and immediately changed her words. I know how to poison people, but it's not like there's a hole in my brain to poison the old emperor. The system looked at the old emperor, who had died a gruesome death. Then what should we do? If you go out, you'll definitely be the murderer. Weiwei Bai. Buy a medicine that can bring the dead back to life or something. The system replied. That thing is ridiculously expensive, I can't afford it. Weiwei Bai said without hesitation. Oh, forget it then. Weiwei Bai was just about to think of another way, such as covering the old emperor with a blanket, pretending that he was not dead, and leaving immediately. Suddenly, a eunuch walked in and shouted respectfully, Your Majesty, the first prince requests an audience. Aha. This howl resounded throughout the entire imperial palace. The system and the host were speechless. Weiwei Bai felt that she was really unlucky this year. Next, the eldest prince rushed in and howled. Father, you died so miserably. Her tears were not meant to be in character. How could she lose? She immediately knelt down and cried. Father, how can you say your last words and go by yourself? Even if you love my mother, you can't die for love. The eldest prince. Weiwei Bai. Ow, 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 he cried more miserably than anyone else. The eldest prince. Weiwei Bai was crying too emotionally. With a flick of her sleeve, a small box rolled out and hit the eldest prince on the head. The first prince hurriedly grabbed the box and opened it. A dark black pill rolled out from within. The situation was very awkward. The first prince and Weiwei Bai looked at each other. Then the first prince seemed to have sensed something. His expression gradually changed, and he shook the pill in his hand. You actually killed your father and the monarch. You even brought poison into the palace. This is spirit shatter powder. Just a little bit and you'll die. Wei Bai. Why are you so knowledgeable about poisons? How did that stupid pill know that it was spirit shatter powder? The eldest prince shouted. Guards, the eldest princess poisoned. Wei Bai felt that she had stepped on dog shit. She brought poison into the palace. Luckily, the old emperor died when she was alone. While sitting in prison, she said to the system, it wasn't easy to coax Lil Liemo into giving me some affection, but now I'm going to be killed. Because the old emperor was dead, the first prince immediately threw her into the imperial prison on the charge of murdering the emperor. That pill was solid proof. If you didn't want to poison the old emperor, why did you bring poison into the palace? So she couldn't get rid of the charge. She could only wait for the first prince to take the throne first, and then execute her. System. Don't worry, your Lily is coming to save you. Outside the palace, the imperial guards and Limo's troops were fighting each other. They killed until the sky turned dark, and the earth turned dark. When the old emperor was still alive, everyone knew not to make a move. Whoever made a move would lose. Now that the old emperor was dead, all the forces had no more reservations. They desperately supported the prince to take the throne. Transmigration system. Adonis, come here. Transmigration system. Adonis, come here. / transmigration system. Adonis, come here. Transmigration system. Adonis, come here. / to make it easier for you to read next time. You can click save to record this reading. Transmigration system. Adonis, come here. Comma. Chapter 2301. Wei Bai asked, did you win? She had been locked up for a week. If not for the system, she would not have known that the outside world was in chaos. Moreover, Liemo found out that the old emperor was dead, and his favorability rose to 75. The system said, you're going to win. Wei Bai immediately tidied her hair and removed the straw from her head. She then posed like a beautiful woman. Do I look good? Does it hurt? The system. Wei Bai lowered her eyes with tears in her eyes, looking very pitiful. She said to the system, I'm just practicing my acting. After all, I know that the pill Liemo gave me was poison. It was to kill my father and frame me. This is the plot of a scumbag's betrayal. The system heard and concluded that it was true. Liemo was such a piece of trash that he couldn't even reach the heavens. This time, he was able to successfully take over the palace and give the fourth prince the throne. It was also because of the interpersonal box that Wei Bai gave him. When Wei Bai was not around, Liemo had that interpersonal box in his hands. He threatened an important official of the imperial court. One threat and one approval. As a result, among the civil officials of the imperial court, more than 60% of them supported Liemo. If not for Wei Bai, he would not have such influence among the civil officials. Wei Bai rubbed her chin. So when Liemo comes later, I'll cry about his betrayal and make him feel guilty. Finally, I'll hug him and comfort him. Because I love him. I forgive him for his betrayal. Before the host could continue being smug, the system said expressionlessly, then his favorability will definitely increase. Wei Bai, the system said, it feels like a scumbag and bitch plot. Wei Bai, the system said, but it should be effective. You can continue to be a scumbag. The scumbag you are, the easier it is to get favorability. That was the logic. But why did it sound so disgusting? The system said, after all, the male lead lacks love. Even if he stabs your kidneys in the end, you'll cry and say, I forgive you, my little Ollie. Wei Bai. Hee. Wei Bai kept quiet, wondering if the system was too lonely. Was it because he saw her and Liemo being lovey-dovey every day? Although it was a terrible trick, it was enough to deal with a character like Liemo who lacked love and security. Her self-sacrifice was indeed the best way to gain favorability. Hence, Wei Bai was eagerly waiting for Liemo to come to the prison to get her. After all, she had already fallen to such a state. If she cried miserably, she would be able to cry a bunch of favorable impression points. In the end, at the last moment, the first prince came in a crazed manner. "It's all your fault, bitch. It's all your fault." The eldest prince had failed to seize power, and it was said that the third prince had been put under house arrest. Seeing that the fourth prince was about to be supported to the throne, it was said that there was only one door left in the palace. If he did, the fourth prince would be able to sit on the throne the next morning. The first prince could only wait for death. The first prince's whip was about to come down. The system immediately took out some tools, such as making the first prince suddenly blind and unable to see Wei by, or making the whip blind and unable to hit anyone. But in the next second, the system's horizontal bar activated. Ding! Detected that dregs have broken through the limit. Side quest activated. The system and Wei by. It's here again, it's here again. It's here again with a nightmare. The side quest suddenly roared. "Ah, I gave you the position of first female lead. Gave you supreme power. So that you could raise little fresh meat. So that he would kneel and massage your legs, sob and warm your bed. Chapter 2302. Side mission. You actually warmed the bed, for that little fresh meat. You were stabbed but still begged to forgive him. Aren't you cheap? Tell me, aren't you cheap? Wei by. Side mission. Cheap, too cheap. The system and the host both went silent. Did the side mission explode? It finally came to life. Side mission. Considering that the male lead is trash, and the female lead is cheap and cheap, it does not conform to the core values. Remorse point mission activated. Before the main mission is completed, please make the male lead feel endless regret and pain for all the trash he has done. Take revenge. He is trash, so torture him. Using the method of torturing trash, you have to get 5 stars of remorse to be considered a success. The side mission ended with a shout. Side mission failed. Experience 10 days of hell with the system. Frying oil, climbing a mountain of swords, diving into a sea of fire, 10,000 ghosts gnawing at your heart. After the side mission was finished, it was satisfied and left. The system and Wei by were speechless. Finally, Wei by sighed. The side mission is actually a pissed-off system? The system held its head and cried. I don't want to go to hell. I have normal values, high morals, virtuous and kind. If I go to hell, my resume will be ruined. Wei by. With this delay, the whip actually came crashing down on her body. Wei by was jolted back to reality by the pain. She looked up and saw the eldest prince's pale, desperate and irritable face. Bitch, Li Mo is one of your people, isn't he? You killed Imperial Father for the throne. Why don't you just die? The eldest prince wildly whipped Wei by. The system wanted to get rid of the whip. Wei by had an idea and immediately stopped it. In the end, it became a life guarantee, blocking out the pain and ensuring that she wouldn't die. Although it didn't hurt, the wound would weaken the body. She lay on the ground in a daze, her gorgeous dress tattered and her hair disheveled. The blood from the wound flowed below her. She heard the system's notification and slowly looked up, finally seeing the man who rushed over. He looked like he was smiling, but he also looked like he was crying. The corners of her mouth twitched, but her eyes were filled with despair. Hearing that the first prince had come to the prison to look for Wei by, Li Mo dragged his blood-stained sword and rushed over with all his might. He saw Wei by lying in a pool of blood. Her veil had been removed, but he couldn't see the color on her face. Blood stained her pale face. Her eyes were blank, and her outstretched fingers seemed to want to grab something. But the only thing that dripped from his fragile fingertips was the blood of pain. Li Mo's mind was completely blank at this moment. There was only that pair of hopeless, gloomy eyes and the blood all over the ground. When had she ever suffered this kind of torment in her dignity? Li Mo fought for days with his injuries. He didn't have time to clean up his face, and his hair was a mess. There was even some stubble on his chin. He knew that she had been thrown into prison. When the old emperor died, he gave her the medicine. In his heart, he even believed that she wouldn't believe him. The drug will be tested to see if it is poisonous. But when the news of the emperor's death spread, and she was the one who poisoned him, he was stunned for a long time. At that moment his heart was filled with pain. She believed him. She never doubted that he would harm her. He risked his life with his injuries. Even when Fang Qingyan stopped him, he still refused to stop. He almost didn't sleep or rest. Finally, after 7 days, he broke into the palace. He came to the prison where the important criminals of the royal family were kept. Chapter 2303. He was afraid that if he was late, Wei Wei Bai would be tortured to death. Fang Qingyan emphasized that she was the eldest princess. Even if she committed a crime that could result in death, no one would dare to humiliate her. Was this what it meant to not humiliate others? Liemo stared blankly at her finger. She seemed to have seen him. That dark gaze had a bit of light. Wei Wei Bai forced her eyelids open. Her eyelashes were stained with blood as she trembled and stared at Liemo. There was a trace of fragile dependence in her eyes, as well as a light of joy. But in the next moment, she seemed to have thought of something. That light disappeared, leaving behind a cold hatred. She pulled the corner of her mouth into a mocking smile, as if wanting to say something. In the end, her eyelashes drooped as she fainted. Limo's sword stabbed into the eldest prince's back, piercing his chest. He didn't even have time to pull the sword out. He stumbled over to hold Wei Wei Bai. She was so weak that he couldn't hear her, so light that she was weightless. Limo's hair was a mess, his armor cold. He was afraid of scratching her. He tore a corner of his clothes and covered her face before holding her up. Blood kept dripping. Limo's lips trembled as his eyes turned red. He ran outside while shouting, "Call the imperial physician! Hurry and call the imperial physician!" This night was destined to be a chaotic one. The sounds of fighting echoed throughout the palace. The civil and military officials were in chaos. The next morning, the coronation ceremony was held in a hurry. The 3-year-old fourth prince ascended the throne and announced that the regent would be Liemo. The man with the greatest contribution to the throne stayed by the eldest princesses' side the entire night. Liemo didn't know how he got through it. The power was in his hands, but he wasn't happy at all. He was even afraid. He was worried that her injuries were too serious to save. When the imperial physician said that she was out of danger, Liemo found his back soaked with sweat. He was covered in the smell of blood and sweat, but he didn't dare get too close to her. He could only crouch by the bed. His handsome and delicate face was still dirty. He was like a kitten, gently holding her fingers, not daring to move. As soon as the effect of the minimum life assurance wore off, Wei Wei Bai woke up in pain. She only felt that she had died once. That brainless first prince knew that he had failed and was about to die, so he wanted to drag her down with him. She beat her with all her might. If it weren't for the life support guarantee, she would probably have died. If it wasn't for the multiple side quests. Actually, she didn't need to use the trick of injuring herself to gain sympathy. However, she had to go to the bitter hell of 10 days tour first. So she could only let the eldest prince beat her up. Otherwise, how could he show his misery and hatred? She struggled to open her eyes. Her fingers trembled as she realized that she was being pressed down by someone. She turned to find Liemo squatting by the bed. He was too tired. His soft and pale face leaned against the side of the bed, pressing against her fingers. Under his eyelashes, there was an unusually thick shadow. He was as frail and helpless as a poor little animal. There was no sense of brutality at all. Wei Wei Bai couldn't help but tremble. She wanted to pull her fingers back. Liemo suddenly opened his eyes. He stared blankly at Wei Wei Bai, his pale lips trembling. "Ah Wei, you're awake. Do you want some water?" He didn't dare to look at her after he finished speaking. He immediately let go of her hand and staggered to get some water. He was so anxious that he broke one of the cups. Wei Wei Bai glanced at the 5 stars floating above his head. Above the 5 stars, there was a string of words floating. This was really a drama. Wei Wei Bai's sad and empty expression was about to collapse. Is at https://www.sashu.com// the to record this reading. Chapter 2304. Out of the 5 stars, one lit up. It seems that little Trashly still knows how to regret. However, wasn't that regret a bit too little? It was only 1 star. No wonder the side quest was so explosive. He almost killed her. He even made her bear the crime of killing her father, and took away her power. Regret was only a small star. He was indeed vicious enough. Liemo poured a cup of water, his fingers trembling. He carefully turned around, but saw Wei Wei reach out, her frail hand supporting herself on the bed. Her face was drained of blood. A pair of dark eyes, dark and sharp. Liemo was stunned. He pursed his lips, about to say something, but he heard Bai Weiwei whisper, full of sarcasm. Commander Li got what he wanted. He destroyed everything for me, made my fourth brother an emperor, and put me in prison. He really calculated every step of the way. And his plan was perfect. Liemo was silent. His eyes were dark and uncertain. He gripped the cup in his hand, not daring to call away again. Wei Wei used all her strength to get off the bed. Her eyes were cold as she looked at him indifferently. I think I have no value anymore. Commander, you don't have to look at me like that. Otherwise, people will think I am bullying you. Her voice was soft, but every word was like a knife. There was no emotion, no fluctuation. When her eyes swept past him, it was as if she was looking at a repulsive dead thing. Liemo bit his lips. His dark eyes had a few ripples, a glimmer of pleading. But he didn't dare to make a sound. Like a child who made a mistake, he lowered his head in fear and trepidation, letting her scold him. As long as she could be appeased, even if it was just a little less hate. When he heard that she poisoned the emperor, he actually regretted it. Because he knew that this was a complete betrayal, an undeniable harm. Killing the emperor and killing the father. He sent the noble and cold her to hell. Wei Wei walked out step by step. Her white dress was the same color as her face, frightening and tragic. Liemo finally rushed forward, reaching out to help her. Wei Wei sneered. Don't touch me. Liemo's fingers froze. The next sentence almost sent him to hell. I think you are dirty. Liemo was stunned. He watched as she dragged her heavily injured body out the door. His blank mind only one thought. She was leaving. She knew that he betrayed her, and took everything from her. So she hated him, and wanted to leave him. This thought came in a rush and surged in his mind. Liemo's eyes turned scarlet from the intense pain that pierced his heart and liver. He said, It's windy outside. You're not in good health, so don't go out. But Bai Weiwei didn't even turn her head. Her every step was trembling, and her thin back couldn't be straightened. However, she relied on this breath to maintain her elegant posture. Just like that, one small step at a time, they were far away from this place. Out of his life. In the next moment, Liemo was behind her. He opened his mouth, wanting to touch her, but remembered that she thought he was dirty. He was indeed dirty. While she was unconscious, he didn't even wash his face. The smell of blood had turned sour. Almost carefully, his fingers pinched the corner of her sleeve. His voice softened. Away, don't go out in the wind. You're not well. Wei Wei wanted to shake him off. She didn't want to look at him. But she was too weak. Even raising her hand was difficult. She couldn't shake off his fingers. / the. Chapter 2305. Liemo lowered his head and bent his body. His tall figure was made to look like a kitten by his depression and fear. He wished he could lick his face and beg Wei Wei for forgiveness. Wei Wei suddenly stopped and said softly, Let go. Liemo held his breath and lowered his head, his black hair falling under his eyes as he remained silent. Wei Wei's voice became sharp. I told you to let go, did you hear me? Liemo hesitated for a moment, and then shook his head vigorously. The corners of his eyes turned red and moist. No, I won't let go. His voice was trembling and choking. Wei Wei paused and didn't say anything. Liemo's terrified look was suddenly filled with joy when he saw her like this. Would she still feel sorry for him? Liemo obediently took a step forward, but he didn't dare to touch her. He could only gently tug at her sleeve. Away, it's my fault. I was wrong really. You can punish me or even kill me. Wei Wei didn't turn around, and didn't even look at him. She only asked softly, Did you know that the pill was poisonous? Liemo's fingers stiffened, and his drooping eyelashes trembled. Wei Wei said word by word. Did you know? Liemo didn't answer, and only tightened his grip on her sleeve. Wei Wei suddenly laughed. Her weak laughter was strangely mournful. You were using me from the start. That so-called liking me is also a lie. You only want that high position, right? Her voice was cold and hoarse as she questioned. Wei Weibai turned around, her eyes full of hatred. Her tears were like knives that wanted to kill his light. Limo's lips trembled, but he couldn't say anything. Only the intense pain in his chest was beginning to spread. Wei Weibai laughed bitterly. Her eyes were bright and moist, without a trace of affection. Limo, you've been lying to me, haven't you? Is it? Every single one of them was the straw that broke his back. Limo only felt his heart empty. All he could see was her eyes filled with hatred. He opened his mouth with great difficulty. I didn't. Wei Weibai asked sarcastically. Do you still want to lie to me? Limo was at a loss for words. He had pretended to get close to her from the start, because he didn't trust her. She gave her the poison, and asked her to kill her own father. From the beginning to the end, it was his choice. There was no escape. Wei Weibai stretched out her fingers. She almost used her fingernails to clasp the back of his hand, to make him let go of her sleeve. But Limo refused to let go. He lowered his eyes, not daring to raise his head. Just like that, he silently grabbed her sleeve. He let her fingernails leave bloody marks on the back of his hand. Wei Weibai looked at him mockingly, which made her lower her head even more. Have I ever wronged you, Limo? The indifference was like a whisper from hell. All the gentleness of the past was buried. Limo raised his head in panic. The wild light in his eyes, the desire ignited by power. It was all replaced by a soulless panic. In this panic, his fingers loosened a little. Wei Weibai's face was pale as she fiercely pulled back her sleeve. It was as if she had taken away her feelings. Her lips were bright red because of the blood. Blood rushed to her head. When she spoke, blood was also spat out. Wei Weibai didn't care about how uncomfortable she felt. She slowly reached out and tidied up her sleeve. She smoothed out all the traces of him pinching. Limo stared blankly as she slowly erased all traces of him. Link to the https://www.sashu.com/ link to the https://www.sashu.com link to the https://www.sashu.com link to the https://m.sashu.com the Chapter 2306. His pair of beautiful eyes were finally filled with mist. The killing intent that rose from the sea of blood and mountains of corpses, cold and strong. It was crushed by her gentle movement. Limo's thin lips moved. His lips were covered in blood from the bite. Away, forgive me this time. I won't do it again. He won't lie to her again. He won't betray her. So forgive him this time. But he didn't see her softening. Bai Weiwei tidied up her sleeves, her incomparably pale face carrying an indifferent expression. Her bloody lips moved slightly. She said words that were enough to send people to hell. You made me kill the emperor and father, made me destroy love. I won't let you go. This was the beginning of a complete break, the beginning of hatred. Limo stared at her blankly, only to see her slowly turn around. Then she walked out step by step. Limo stared blankly at her back. He staggered a few steps before suddenly pouncing on her. He was too impatient. He reached out his hand and threw himself forward, rolling on the ground. But he didn't care about his sorry state. His hair was messy as he reached out and hugged her leg. Away, don't go. I won't lie to you anymore. Really. When he had given her the pill, he had done so out of malice. She didn't want to give up everything and elope with him. He was angry, so he gave her the pill. But he didn't expect that she would really give the pill to the old emperor. He thought that she wouldn't be so stupid. She actually believed everything he said. She wanted to save him. She wanted the emperor to live, so that he could come back and not be a scapegoat. But he sent her to hell. Limo's voice trembled as he kept apologizing. Forgive me this time. Forgive your little Ali this time. Just this once. He hugged her leg and started sobbing. Away, just forgive me. Wei Weibai was holding her body up. Her wound hurt so much that her scalp was about to explode. For the sake of torturing scum, for the sake of 5 stars. Was it easy for her? In the end, she finally got up to show off and was about to walk out. Limo's hug made her extremely uncomfortable. Wei Weibai was on the verge of collapsing. She gritted her teeth and said, "Let go of me and get lost." The whip wound on her leg was healed. It was very painful. You little jerk. Liemo cried. No, don't leave me. I won't do it again. Wei Wei Bai wanted to kick him away, but it was too uncomfortable. Wei Wei Bai couldn't lift her feet. Motherfucker, how could he be so cruel? Only 2 stars lit up on the regret value of scum abuse. She said that she wouldn't dare to do it again, and that she would forgive her. But that was all she showed. She was using her life to perform and earn regret points. She was a good person, and didn't want to go to hell. Wei Wei Bai opened her mouth, and spat out a mouthful of blood. Then she collapsed and fainted. Liemo reached out, caught her body, and carried her in a princess carry. The imperial physician was also on standby, and immediately ran over to check on him. Liemo held her hand tightly. The frailty, panic, and pitiful look on his face disappeared. His eyes were filled with tears, unusually clear and sharp. His expression was gloomy and sinister. After stabilizing his injury with great difficulty, Liemo turned to the imperial physician and said, "Adding medicine to make the body weak and unable to walk, will it harm the body?" The imperial physician didn't react at first and answered honestly, "No, especially for the princess's body. She also needs to be added with this type of medicine. Let her rest well, and it will help her recover." Below to record this reading. Chapter 2307. Liemo's eyes lit up. Then join and let her rest. That was the logic. Why did the imperial physician feel that Liemo was strangely excited when he spoke? When the imperial physician left to decoct the medicine, Fang Qingyan finally finished dealing with a bunch of miscellaneous matters and returned. He saw Liemo squatting beside the bed, looking neither human nor ghost. He looked like an evil spirit guarding a treasure. Fang Qingyan's footsteps paused as she looked at her lord, who had not bathed, was covered in blood, and had hair as dirty as a beggar's. He was speechless for a while. He finally made it through. Liemo was still staring at Wei Wei Bai in a daze, as if he could see the end of time. Fang Qingyan coughed. Liemo didn't care. Advisor Fang had no choice but to take out a booklet. "Well, you are now the Prime Minister. His Majesty wants you to remember to attend court tomorrow." Whether it was a civil official or a military general, they were all Liemo's people. The 4th prince was a child. The 4th prince's mother was a palace maid who had never seen the world. Now, Liemo was the sole leader of the imperial palace. Liemo didn't care, still looking at Wei Wei Bai in silence. Advisor Fang. Didn't he love power the most? Didn't he scold the princess for not eloping with him, and call him a wretched pig-trotter? Didn't he want to be so powerful that the princess would regret not eloping with him the moment she saw him? Didn't he succeed? Why did he still look like his parents had died? No, Liemo's parents' death would only make him happy. Because his parents weren't human. Advisor Fang had no choice but to find a topic. The princess hasn't woken up yet? Liemo's eyelashes fluttered, finally showing some life in his dispirited eyes. He looked up with grievance, tears about to fall. "Away, she doesn't want me anymore." Advisor Fang. Liemo's entire body trembled as tears rolled down his cheeks. He pursed his lips, sobbing. "She doesn't forgive me, hates me, and says she will never forgive me." Advisor Fang really wanted to say that he deserved it. But when he thought of Liemo's unblinking sword, he comforted him. "Isn't it natural for her to be resentful? Didn't you say that even if she hates you, you still want power?" Liemo reached out to wipe his tears as well as his nose. He groaned. "But when she said that she didn't want me, I felt that even power couldn't make me happy. I felt so bad that I wanted to die." Counselor Fang patiently advised. "Then let's win back her feelings. After all, you did deceive her." Liemo's eyes were swollen from crying. He struggled to open his eyes. How? Fang Qingyan. How to solve this problem was even more difficult than how to become the emperor. The inhumane things that Liemo had done. Any normal person would hate him until the end of time. When Wei Wei Bai woke up, she didn't stab Liemo to death because she loved him too much. How was he going to salvage the situation? Suicide, or something along those lines. Of course, he couldn't say these words. Liemo had some problems with his brain. If he really committed suicide, it would be over. So Fang Qingyan could only answer with a jack of all trades. Let her stay first. Then let her beat and scold you. Be obedient and show her your manliness. Make an abacus, and kneel in front of her every day. Liemo was silent. His beautiful eyes stared blankly at the girl lying on the bed, covered in wounds. Fang Qingyan was afraid that he would go crazy again. He tried to persuade him. Think of a way to make her stay first. / to make it easier for you to read next time. You can click save at the bottom to record this reading. Chapter 2308. Liemo nodded, his eyes soft and dark. It's fine, she can't get out of here. Advisor Fang ? Liemo reached out and gently touched her pale face. His voice was clear and gentle. I'll ask the Imperial doctor to add more medicine. She can't leave even if she wants to. As long as she couldn't walk, even if she didn't forgive him, she couldn't leave him. Advisor Fang silently retreated a few steps. His lord's illness was too frightening. It was snowing. After the heavy rain, light snow fell to the ground. The palace had a new master. The fourth prince was the emperor, and Liemo was the regent. Even in the court, Liemo had the final say. Liemo also followed the proper etiquette. Before the snow fell, he took Weiwei out of the palace. After leaving the palace, they lived in the princess's residence. This was where Weiwei was used to living. If Liemo wanted to please her, even a look would do. But Weiwei sat in a wheelchair, wearing a fox fur cloak, with a beautiful face. In the snow, she looked like the most beautiful jade lotus. But she was also extremely cold, never looking at him. Ever since she left the palace, she no longer wore a veil. Her promises to him were broken one by one. She also didn't call her little Ali. The servants collected the first snow in the courtyard, to store it for next year's tea. This was what Liemo used to disdain, but Weiwei liked it. He did his best to restore the princess's residence. He also restored the things she liked one by one. Only her feelings for him were in pieces. Liemo carefully held a heater in his hands. His beautiful eyes filled with a soft pleading look. Away, it's cold. Warm your hands. Weiwei wanted to raise her hand, but found her fingers weak. Liemo saw a trace of sadness in her eyes. He lowered his eyelashes, hiding the darkness in his eyes. He said softly, the Imperial doctor said your blood is attacking your heart, and your limbs are too injured. You can't use any strength. You can slowly exercise in the future. Weiwei was expressionless as she glanced sideways at him. Go to the courtyard and collect the first snow. Liemo's eyes flashed with joy. Wei, are you willing to talk to me? Weiwei said coldly. I just don't want to see you. After saying that, she turned her face away and lowered her eyes, refusing to look at him. Liemo was thick-skinned, and forced the small thermos into her hand. It's Wei's request. Of course I have to do it. He completely ignored her last sentence. Liemo ran to collect the first snow with the servants. These were all things that Weiwei needed in early spring. If he didn't seriously buy it, he wouldn't even know. Her favorite rouge was made from fresh petals of the season. The tea he drank was not the cold spring water of early spring. It was to store the first snow. Even the clothes she wore, and the hairpins in her hair. They were all indescribably noble. She used to be the most honorable princess of the first generation. Everything she wore, ate, used, and saw was the best in the world. Liemo held the first snow, his eyes blank. At that time, he had relied on a burst of energy and a wanton attitude, holding the mentality of giving it a try, running to seduce her. Later, she loved him, cherished him, and protected him. He was proud of himself, thinking that she coveted his beauty and admired his youthful appearance. So he didn't cherish her feelings. She spoiled him. So when she made him unhappy, he betrayed her and made her lose everything. Until she no longer looked at him. He suddenly realized what he had lost. T. Chapter 2309. Especially when he personally bought her things she loved, and entered her life. He felt that he was a joke. Weiwei grew up in a place where she had seen everything. Although he considered himself to be top-notch in terms of beauty, he was not the only one in this world. She loved him. From the beginning to the end, it was him. So she respected him, and never treated him as a boy toy. She also tried her best to help him gain power. His current power as a civil official came from the box she gave him. One person gave so much. Even the most honorable person in the world gently stepped down from the altar, reaching out to take him into her arms, sheltering him from the wind and rain, protecting him. But because of a single mistake, he completely ruined her love. Lemo's heart hurt, densely cut. His fingers were stinging from the cold snow turning red. But Lemo did not care, even deliberately. Then he carried a jar of snow and hurried back to the corridor, intending to show it to Wei Bai. It was best to let her see his red fingers. Then she would feel sorry for him. But there was no one in the corridor. However, the small thermos that he had given her was left on the floor of the porch. Lemo stared blankly for a while, then suddenly returned to his cold and gloomy expression. "Where is Her Highness?" The servant immediately lowered his head in fear and trepidation. She went to the backyard. Lemo pursed his lips, looking down in silence. Then he suddenly turned around and ran to the backyard. The backyard was full of plum trees, and now was the day when the plum blossoms had just bloomed. Lemo hurried to the backyard and saw Wei Bai sitting in a wheelchair. Her black hair draped over her shoulders, and on her cheeks that were whiter than snow, there was a light red mark, adding to her beauty. His footsteps slowed. He saw the corner of her lips slightly curl, and her eyes softening. Lemo only felt his heart beating like a deer. How long had it been since she smiled? Lemo only felt that she was too beautiful. Just as he was about to walk over, a pretentious voice sounded. "Your Highness, this servant picked flowers for you. Are they beautiful?" A sissy voice, a coy and shameless attitude. Lemo's eyes turned cold. He saw the young man called Little Six running over with a plum blossom branch in his arms. Wei Bai reached out and took a plum blossom. She lowered her head and sniffed it. Then she praised softly, "The flowers are very good." Little Six smiled. "As long as your Highness is happy, Little Six can do anything for your Highness." Wei Bai's eyes softened as she smiled and said, "Don't tell me it's just sweet nothings again." These words were spoken in a casual manner, but it invisibly stung Lemo. Xiao Lu boldly pulled on her sleeve. Seeing that she didn't refuse, he immediately said happily, "Your Highness, even if it's sweet talk, it's only sweet talk to your Highness. Xiao Lu likes your Highness very much." Wei Bai said, "It's no use trying to please me. I'm a useless person now. I can't give you anything." Little Six grabbed her sleeve and smiled pleasantly. "Your Highness, I want you to be happy." Wei Bai's cold expression loosened a little. She seemed to have sensed something and looked back. She saw Lemo holding a jar in his hand. The young man's face was cold and malicious. A pair of eyes stared fixedly at her sleeve. The smile on Wei's lips disappeared, and her eyes turned cold. As if on purpose, she reached out and carefully touched Little Six's hair. Her fingers didn't dare to touch his scalp. After all, she was allergic to men. Chapter 23:10. From afar, the girl looked very gentle. That young man called Little Six took his place. Lemo felt as if all his senses were cut in half. The jar in his hand cracked little by little, revealing the first snow, falling to the ground. Lemo smiled coldly, the ruthlessness in his eyes growing. Wei Bai didn't mind, letting Little Six push her wheelchair. When she passed by Lemo, she suddenly looked up at him. Lemo trembled. She was almost ignoring him. It was rare for her to call him that. Lemo immediately looked up, his eyelids trembling, the gloom in his beautiful eyes disappearing. There was a trace of hope. Wei Bai lazily looked at him, then lowered her eyelashes, her tone calm. "I see that Little Six serves me well, so I'll let him serve me in the future." Lemo could only feel the familiar scent of blood surging into his heart. Murderous intent filled his eyes. Wei Bai calmly said, "You said you want to give me everything to ask for my forgiveness, right? Let me have one more person in my room, that's fine too." Lemo loosened his hand. His palm was cut by the edge of the jar, but he didn't show it. Instead, he tightly gripped the wound. He showed a brilliant smile. "Ah Wei, of course I will give you whatever you like." Wei Bai coldly smiled. "I hope so. With Little Six, you won't appear in front of me so often. After all, I'm tired of seeing you. It's annoying." These words were said casually without any care. There was no respect at all. Wei Bai calmly said, "Little Six, push me to see the snow." Little Six happily pushed her immediately. Yes, Your Highness. When they were far enough, Wei Wei Bai dared to look back. She found Li Mo was still in the same spot, his body emitting a terrifying black aura. And of the 5 stars above his head, 3 were already lit. Those trashy banners were also missing a few. Wei Wei Bai said to the system with a crying face. How long has it been since the affection went up? System. From beginning to end 75. Actually, she was tormenting the male lead with all her might. It was good enough that her favorability didn't drop. She still wanted to increase her favorability? Wei Wei Bai said, this won't work. We need to increase the favorability. Otherwise, a black-hearted person like Li Mo will definitely explode. Li Mo's forbearance stemmed from guilt. However, even though she tormented him with guilt every day, their favorability towards each other had not reached the point where they would share life and death together. Perhaps one day, Li Mo would take things too hard and kill her with one strike of his sword. Li Mo looked at the sunny young man. He was a psychopath who killed without batting an eyelid. The system said, you already have other little fresh meats around you. How are you expecting him to increase his favorability? Wei Wei Bai. It's useless even if there's a little fresh meat. I'm allergic to him. It was not easy to come to a plane with a high status. There was a pile of young hunks around her. But in the end, she could only look but not touch them. Now that Li Mo was here, he was going to torture him. The main system really didn't care what plane she was in. It didn't give her any benefits at all. She watched the snow with little Six for a long time. Wei Wei Bai felt that she had played enough, so she went back to her room to rest. While she was half lying on the bed reading, Li Mo walked in. The young man's ponytail was tied up high, and he wore black clothes that were tied tightly around his waist. He had a pair of eyes, long and delicate eyelashes, and an extremely lovable and obedient smile. Your Highness. He came to her side, his voice soft and lingering at the end. Wei Wei Bai's fingers trembled, but she didn't look up, treating him as if he didn't exist. Li Mo, on the other hand, used all the charm he had towards her. Download the https://m/sashu.com button at the bottom to record your reading record. Quick Transmigration System. Male God, come here. Chapter 23:11. Even that ugly little Six was able to get her to treat him differently. He was also able to be so lovable, so obedient as her slave. It's time to drink the medicine. His voice was soft as he leaned forward, wanting nothing more than to stick to her. Wei Wei Bai's face was cold as ice, but her breathing stopped. Li Mo saw this and his smile became even sweeter. She wasn't indifferent. Even if she hated him, she still loved him. There were traces of love. During this time, every time Li Mo woke up in the middle of the night, he would remember the time when she loved him. Her love for him was gentle. That gentleness was too good to be true. His gloomy and evil aura had been dissolved by her. No matter how much Li Mo hated her, he refused to look at her. But he didn't dare to make her hate him. Li Mo held the spoon and whispered, Your Highness, I will feed you. She was respectful and well-behaved. He deliberately raised his head, revealing his beautiful white swan neck. The youth's face was clean and handsome. His pupils were so clear that one could see the bottom. His appearance was always coaxing and deceiving. If Li Mo could seduce her once, he could seduce her a second time. Wei Wei Bai said coldly, Scram. Li Mo heard the slight tremble in her voice. Li Mo's eyes deepened. His smile was soft and cute. Your Highness, drink it and I will scram. Bai Wei Wei squinted at him, pursing her lips in silence. Li Mo seemed to be encouraged as he carefully brought the spoon to her lips. His tone was close to pleading. Your Highness, drink some. He was afraid of rejection. The pleading in his eyes wasn't fake, it was real. Wei Wei Bai's face was pale. Her skin, which had lost too much blood, felt weak. But her eyes were still cold and hard. Just when he thought she was going to reject him again, Wei Wei Bai slowly lowered her head. Her pale lips held the spoon and drank the medicine. Li Mo was stunned. When he came back to his senses, his eyes flashed with ecstasy. He was afraid that she would be annoyed, so he immediately sped up and fed her the medicine. Wei Wei Bai did not refuse this time. After slowly finishing the drink, she wiped her mouth with a handkerchief and tossed it to Li Mo. Aren't you going to scram after drinking the medicine? Scram. Liemo held a bowl of medicine. His eyelashes fluttered, and he suddenly lay down on the ground. Then he hugged the bowl and left. Wei Bai. The embroidery system was speechless. Male lead, what's wrong with you? Was the ball on his body? A moment later, Liemo rolled back. The young man rolled to the side of the bed and lay on the ground. He supported his face with both hands and said with a smile, Your Highness, do I look good rolling? Wei Bai remained silent, but her lips were tightly pursed. He made her laugh. Wei Bai bit her lip, suppressed her smile, and lowered her head coldly. Let's go. I want to rest. Liemo narrowed his eyes. Today, she showed the slightest bit of reluctance to refuse. It made him want to push his luck. Liemo stretched out his hand. His beautiful wrist peeked out from his sleeve. His slender fingers grabbed her dress that was hanging by the bed. As if acting coquettishly, he lowered his eyes and whispered, Your Highness, I'm so tired that I can't walk. Can you allow this small space by the bed to rest for a while? Wei Bai's cold eyes fell on him, but she found that when Liemo rolled around, his collar was loose. Under his neck, his fair skin and delicate collarbone were exposed. His face was unparalleled. When he smiled pleasantly, it was as if his eyes were shining. Liemo's voice was sweet and seductive like poison. His voice was low, but it was seductive. Your Highness, I only ask to be a cushion by your bed, for you to step on. For the https://www.sashu.com/ for the full text. https://www.sashu.com for the full text. https://www.sashu.com for the full text. https://m/sashu. COMT for the full text, comma. Chapter 23:12. Wei Bai stared at him coldly for a few seconds. Liemo's smile was even more adorable, without a trace of gloominess. Wei Bai said in a low voice, Get out. Liemo's smile froze. Did he still fail? The huge sense of loss made him unable to suppress the violent anger in his heart. That little six could do it, but he couldn't? His face was the only thing left that could seduce her. She didn't even like his face. What else could he do to make her change her mind? If she didn't believe him and hated him, what could he do? She would only be fed up with him, and wouldn't give him any chance to redeem himself. If one day she found out that she couldn't stand up because he drugged her, then she would hate him for the rest of her life. Liemo didn't want to see that scene. He couldn't let go of her. If she questioned him, and wanted to leave, then he could only reveal his ferocious and crazy side, and completely cut off her escape route. At that time, they would really fight to the death. Liemo's expression was stiff. He suppressed his anger again and again, but still stood up and prepared to leave. When he reached the door, he heard Wei Bai's indifferent voice. Close the door, I want to rest. Liemo didn't react at first. When he stepped out, he was about to close the door. But he thought of something, and suddenly looked back at the bed. The girl on the bed frowned. Her eyes were filled with worry, but it was only for a moment. Soon, her melancholy disappeared under her calm and icy expression. Liemo's heart beat faster. He stealthily withdrew his foot from the door. Then he closed the door. When he put his fingers on the door, his fingers were sweaty. After a while, he found that she didn't chase him away. Liemo's breathing quickened. After a moment of silence, he calmly turned back. Then he walked to the bed. Wei Bai closed the book and pulled the blanket over. She leaned against the pillow and was about to close her eyes. But she heard the hoarse and low voice of a youth beside the bed. Away! He muttered in a low voice. His usual clear voice was deliberately lowered, ambiguous and lingering. Wei Bai looked up and her expression froze. The young man had already loosened his belt, and his clothes were hanging loosely under his elbows. His beautiful body was in the dark. There was a kind of bone-piercing beauty. Liemo smiled like a demon that was about to bring disaster to people. It was not feminine, but it was so exquisite that it did not seem human. His appearance had always been bewitching. When he was young, he did it to protect himself. He disfigured his face, and became a dirty little beggar-like child. He had grown up and had the ability to protect himself. He would kill anyone who coveted him. Later on, he hated trouble, so he would always deliberately change his expression to hide the charming side of his appearance. It was pleasing to the eye, but it was clean and sunny. Even if he tried to seduce Wei Wei Bai in the beginning, she had never shown such a bewitching side. Wei Wei Bai was in a trance. She moved her lips, as if she wanted to tell him to get lost. But Liemo was already half lying on the bed. "Your Highness, is it all right for this subject to take up this small space to rest?" His delicate shoulder line and the skin under his shoulders were dazzling white. Wei Wei Bai finally looked away. She forced herself to maintain a calm outer shell, but she did not dare to look at him again. Liemo slowly reached out to touch her, but he heard her say coldly, "What else do you want from me?" This sentence was like a basin of cold water. It made Liemo's body stiffen. Wei Wei Bai looked back at him. Her eyes were already red. Every word she said was heartbreaking. "What else do I have that you have not taken away?" Button. Chapter 23:13. Fang Qingyan carefully suggested, "Why don't we just send him away?" He was obviously jealous of little Six, but he still let him hang around the princess every day. Liemo was silent and finally he whispered, "She's happy." Fang Qingyan. Damn. His master was so arrogant and domineering in the imperial court. When he returned home, he was like a wronged little wife. Liemo lowered his head and walked over. Wei Wei Bai didn't seem to see him. Liemo went over, licking his face. He put away his hostility, and the gloominess in his eyes disappeared. He showed a cute and pure smile. "Ah Wei, it's snowing so heavily today. Are you drawing?" Wei Wei Bai looked up at him lazily. She didn't wait for him to be happy and smiled coldly. Then she looked away and didn't say anything. He was used to her ignoring him. Liemo held back his sadness and continued to work hard. He squeezed little Six aside and smiled. "I can draw too. Can I draw one for Ah Wei?" Little Six almost fell out of the squeezing. Liemo casually crumpled little Six, drawing into a ball, and threw it on the ground. Then he smiled, obedient and cute. He spread out the drawing paper and was about to draw her. But Wei Wei Bai whispered, "Little Six, let's go see the flowers." Little Six jumped up and happily ran to push the wheelchair. "Yes, Your Highness." Then he pushed Wei Wei Bai and quickly left. Liemo froze on the spot. Holding the pen, he anxiously watched Wei Wei leave with that little slut. Fang Qingyan was scared out of her wits. She was worried that Liemo would draw his sword. During this time, Liemo was full of murderous intent to eliminate the other party. The bloody water in the prison was carried out in buckets. The jade-faced Azura that made people tremble in fear. In the princess's residence, why did he look like a little pitiful person who failed to fight for favor and was sent to the cold palace? Liemo pursed his thin lips, his expression unspeakably uncomfortable. The painting under his brush became clearer. Even if she had already left, he continued to draw her. The beautiful girl leaned against the chair, her eyes bright. The smile on her bright red lips was even more stunning. It was as if he could see the girl in the painting calling him sweetly. "Little Ollie, my little Ollie." Liemo stared blankly at the painting, his eyes red. His voice trembled slightly. "She still refuses to forgive me. Even if there was some softening, it was only a few strands." She blamed him. She hated him. How could he not know? He had done everything he could to make her happy. He had even tolerated little Six. Liemo's lips trembled as he looked up at Fang Qingyan. "Shouldn't we find a few more pretty boys to make Ah Wei happy?" Fang Qingyan. What the fuck? What the fuck? This old woman who couldn't even hold on to her husband's heart had found a bunch of beautiful concubines outside. She was here to curry favor with her husband so that she could gain a little bit of gratitude. Counselor Fang was shocked, speechless at his lord, who had turned into a resentful woman. He muttered, "I think the princess is still angry, but forget about finding pretty boys. After all, the more boys there are, the less attention she will give you." It was such a simple logic. Everyone understood. Liemo smiled bitterly, the corners of his lips curling up as he looked at the painting. He slowly began to draw again. There were more things around the girl, and the drawing was clearer. But it was an iron cage. "I really want to lock her up completely, so that she can't see anyone, so that she can't smile at others." // Chapter 23:14. His smile slowly turned dark. But I can't bear to. He couldn't bear to part with her, softening. If he had been more humble, she would have forgiven him. Fang Qingyun silently took a few steps away from him. Wei Bai said to the system, "After the 3 stars light up, that black-hearted Liemo won't regret it at all." She had used up all her tricks. Liemo was like a doe, smiling no matter how much she tormented him. The stars on his forehead didn't move at all. After the 3 stars lit up, the other 2 stars seemed to have solidified. And on the stars, there were even more trash words. This proved that Liemo was more resistant to torment, more sinister, and less likely to increase regret. If it wasn't for her allergy to men, she would have cuckolded him. Wei Bai thought hard. Could it be that my skills in tormenting people have deteriorated? Liemo was thick-skinned and black-hearted, and he completely ignored the usual torments. The system was embroidered with chrysanthemums. You want to increase favorability and torture him, so of course your hands are tied. Why don't you just torture him until he's full of regret, and then increase favorability? Wei Bai heard and nodded slowly. Torture him big, the system said. That's easy. Just find a reason to ally with the 3rd prince, take away the male lead's power, and make him miserable. The male lead loved power the most. If you want to torture, you should torture his favorite. Wei Bai nodded. That makes sense. The system said. After seizing his power, lock him up and fucking him. We'll provide a one-stop service of chains and cages in a small black room. I guarantee that he'll act up in Stockholm, and his regret points and favorability will both rise. Wei Bai said, "Damn, that's good. Why didn't I think of that?" The system sighed. I didn't want you to complete the mission. After all, it's intolerable to send such a kind, beautiful, and pure system to hell. Wei Bai. Because it was a kind, pure, and perfect system's perfect suggestion. Wei Bai decided to extend her evil claws to the 3rd prince. When he was tormenting Liemo earlier, he wanted to increase his favorability, so he didn't dare to be too harsh. But the thought of seizing power back, locking Liemo up, etc. At first, the favorability would definitely drop, but after being locked up for a long time, he wouldn't be able to see anyone else. Even a sow could compete with a Diao cicada. Moreover, she was so beautiful. His impression of her would definitely increase. Even if he failed to seize power, it was fine. He could still torture Liemo. A plan to kill 2 birds with 1 stone. Tongzi was indeed virtuous, kind and smart. Liemo was brewing medicine for Wei Bai. The secret guard respectfully handed over the letter. It was Wei Bai who had sent the message. Liemo stared at the letter for a long time before bursting into laughter. This laughter was sinister, and there was actually a trace of madness that made people fear. Suddenly, he stopped smiling, and his voice was cold and penetrating. Send the letter to the 3rd prince. After so long, he thought that he could at least soften her a little and make her hate him less. But it turned out that it was all because of her purpose. She wanted to join forces with the 3rd prince and fight him off the stage. Liemo's face was morbidly red, and his eyes were gloomy as he looked at the medicine pot. After a long silence, he continued fanning the furnace, brewing medicine for her. It seems that if I don't destroy your hope, you won't feel at ease staying by my side. Only in the middle of the night. He always hoped that the girl who doted on him would look at him dotingly again. One look was enough. But he had ruined all of this. Liemo's crazy eyes were tinged with grievance. Is it so hard to forgive me just once away? To make it easier for you to read it next time, you can click save below to record this reading. Chapter 23:15. Wei Bai knew the letter was intercepted by Liemo. The princess's residence was completely surrounded. Even a spy's letter would be useless, let alone a messenger pigeon. The 3rd prince was guarded so tightly that not a single drop of water was leaked out. Wei Bai accepted the system's suggestion and started to fight for power. But she knew the best time was over. Liemo held the power tightly in his hands. The emperor was only 3 years old, and the only one he could rely on was Liemo. Even if Wei Wei Bai allied with the third prince, it would be impossible to shake Li Mo's position unless they used force. But force was in Li Mo's hands. So her rebellion with the third prince was doomed. Wei Wei Bai touched her face. Actually, I can also take the path of a demoness who brings disaster to the country. But thinking of how Li Mo already did that to me, I don't have enough creativity. Ignoring the beauty discussion, the system said. The letter was sent out. The third prince can't come out, but he sent someone to contact you. But the male lead knows. Wei Wei Bai said. Power can't be taken, but abuse can still be done. Let Li Mo know that he planned to betray him. Let him experience the sour and spicy feeling of being betrayed. When the letter was intercepted, the fourth star dimmed. Because it wasn't enough abuse, the light was almost extinguished. Wei Wei Bai said. Right, can you let me stand up? The system flipped through it and took out its candy. Here, eat half. I guarantee you'll be full of energy. If the system's food was given to a human, the effect would be tens or hundreds of times better. So it couldn't be given to the host easily. One wrong move, and the host would be poisoned to death. Wei Wei Bai ate the candy and suddenly felt a surge of divine power. She felt comfortable all over. She suddenly felt like she could kick Li Mo, hit Li Mo, spin him a dozen times and throw him into a cesspool. This candy, the system said, you'll be disfigured if you eat too much. Wei Wei Bai. Poo poo poo. It was snowing heavily, and the red plum blossoms on the plum trees were in full bloom. Li Mo chuckled and lowered his head. He extended his slender fingers and gently combed through her hair. Ah Wei, I've made a few sets of beautiful head ornaments for you. When they send them over, take a look and see if they look good. Wei Wei Bai was incomparably cold. She lowered her eyes and didn't say anything. He tied her hair into a bun and put a flower hairpin on her head. In the mirror, she was still cold and delicate, but her beauty had not diminished. Fortunately, she couldn't leave the princess's residence. Otherwise, just her appearance alone would be enough to make her famous. Li Mo looked at her in the mirror. In the mirror, he realized that compared to her, he was dull and dull. Wei Wei Bai unhurriedly reached out and touched the hairpin. Then, she took it out and casually threw it on the ground. Ugly. Li Mo's long eyelashes trembled slightly, but there was no trace of displeasure in his eyes. He quickly bent down and picked up the flowers. If Ah Wei doesn't like it, I'll pick another one for you. But he heard the girl say coldly, no need. I'll get sick of it no matter how much you do. Let little six do it. You stay away from me. Li Mo held the flowers in his hands. The smile on his face was stiff. He looked at her helplessly and sorrowfully. His thin lips were pressed into a tight line. He looked like he was crying and smiling at the same time. Wei Wei Bai was indifferent. No matter how he humiliated himself, she wouldn't look at him. Li Mo finally lowered his head. His eyes were weak as he whispered, okay. He left with difficulty. Behind him she suddenly said, Today, I'm going to the lake with little six. Let your dog open the door. / to make it easier for you to read it next time. You can click save at the bottom to record this reading. Chapter 23:16. The door to the princess's residence was always closed. Unless Li Mo came back from court. Li Mo stopped in his tracks. In the darkness, he looked up coldly with his back to her. As sinister as a demon. But his voice was still as gentle as ever. Ah Wei, the weather is cold. Your health is not good. Wei Wei Bai sneered. What, you're really putting me under house arrest? Don't you know whether my health is good or not? Li Mo's eyelashes fluttered. This sentence seemed to have a hidden meaning. He clenched his fingers, not daring to persuade her again. But his body trembled slightly. He endured for a long time before opening his thin lips. As long as Ah Wei is happy, I'll go with you, okay? Bai Wei Wei was neither salty nor light, as she held the rouge paper and pursed her lips. The bright red was dazzling. She laughed softly, full of mockery. Who do you think you are? This consort is tired of playing with you. It's so annoying to see you every day. I'm going out to get some fresh air, and you're following me. Have some self-awareness. Li Mo's face paled. His body stiffened and he didn't move. Wei Wei Bai said with a trace of disdain. Go call little six. You hide far away, and don't let me see you. Li Mo lowered his head, hiding his eyes in his hair. After a long time, she heard him reply calmly, "And I'll go." Then he went out and opened the door, only to find the world was filled with desolate white snow. He reached out and rubbed his eyes, wiping away the ruthless pain in his eyes. Then he went to find that little bitch. So many times, he wanted to kill that mistress who coveted Awe. But when he thought of making Awe happy, he endured. After enduring for so long, she shattered all his hopes with her own hands. She wanted to team up with the third prince and kill him. When Liemo returned to his cold and empty room, he saw Advisor Fong eating sweet potatoes. He didn't say a word and kicked the table over. The roasted sweet potatoes on the table fell to the ground. Liemo pulled out his sword and, without a word, chopped up the sweet potatoes with all his might. Advisor Fong. Then the advisor silently hid the sweet potato in his hand. But he saw Liemo look at him with a sinister gaze. The advisor silently took out the sweet potato and handed it to Liemo. Liemo chopped it up again. Then Liemo sat down, holding his sword in silence. His expression was terrifying. The tactician also had a solemn expression on his face. The sweet potatoes were rotten, and he had nothing to eat. Of course he would be solemn. A cold wind. Liemo finally said, "She wants to betray me. She wants to kill me and leave me." As for the Lord's temperament, she was not in tune with him. Fang Qingyan was already unusually calm. You have to think about the princess's current situation. Originally, she was only second to one person, and above all, she was so noble and insufferably arrogant. In the end, she was reduced to a wheelchair, unable to go out, and even killed her own father. She was betrayed by the one she loved as he spoke. The advisors. He risked his life to conclude. I think it's very difficult for the princess to forgive the person who put her in this situation. In fact, the princess was only treating Liemo coldly. Advisor Fong couldn't help but think of the fact that he had a partner like Liemo. She had already given him a dozen packs of rat poison to kill him. After he died, she would throw him into the mass grave to feed the dogs. Liemo looked at the sword in a daze. His eyes made one's scalp tingle. He suddenly smiled. I know she loves me. Fang Qingyan choked. If you say so. Liemo lowered his eyes, his smile a bit sad. She just doesn't forgive me. As long as she forgives me, she will still call me Ali. She didn't even call him that now. But next time when you open the bookshelf, you can see it. If you like. Chapter 23:17. You can search time travel system. Prince Charming, come to search book, www.sashu.com. In Baidu to find the S. Liemo's name seemed to stain her mouth. Her new favorite was that little six. Liemo knew that she only let little six get close to her to spite him. That little six didn't even hold her hand. Liemo got up and left with his sword. I will make her love me again. Love? Advisor Fong felt that his head was filled with the word doting floating in the air. His lord, who was decisive in killing people outside. As soon as he came home, he became a whining and unreasonable freak, who only knew how to fight for favor and failed. Every time he opened his mouth, he would say something like love. Fang Qingyan was silent for a long time, before finally taking out the sweet potato he had hidden with great difficulty. He sighed and ate the sweet potato. I can't see through this world anymore. What the hell is this? The lake water was not frozen yet. Little Six held the umbrella and happily covered the girl in the wheelchair. Her eyes were clean and cold, like deep ice water, cold and elegant like the tip of a plum blossom. The ship slowly moved. Wei Wei Bai was on the deck, quietly watching the snow fall. The third prince's men had quietly gathered. Among them were a dozen martial arts experts, all of whom were raised by the third prince. The rest of the imperial court's forces were mostly cleaned up by Liemo. Therefore, those who were left behind for the third prince were all experts of the same level. Not smart, but not bad at martial arts. One of them seemed to be the leader, and handed a letter to Wei Wei Bai. Your Highness, this is what our master hopes you can do. Wei Wei Bai opened the letter and glanced at it. It was nothing more than a sinister plan to confuse Liemo, steal secrets and poison him. The leader said coldly, Liemo, that disrespectful bastard, must be eliminated. We will do our best to help your highness complete the mission. Wei Wei Bai smiled faintly and suddenly said, "Actually, you can kill him now." The leader frowned and was about to ask something when he suddenly paused. Inside the cabin, a young man in black clothes slowly walked out. His hair was tied up with a red ribbon, and his eyes were exquisite. His gaze was sinister. Li Mo held his sword and looked at Wei Wei Bai. He lowered his head like a child who had made a mistake. "Ah Wei, look at how dangerous it is outside. If I don't follow you, who will protect you?" Wei Wei Bai, on the other hand, was full of smiles. She turned around as gentle as poison. "Ali, did you come alone?" Li Mo trembled, a trace of disbelief appearing in his eyes. He immediately smiled happily and nodded. "I came here alone." Bai Weiwei's smile became even more beautiful. Her words were vicious. "Then it's perfect to kill you. You won't be able to escape from the encirclement of so many experts." After that, Wei Wei Bai's expression turned cold. "There was no ambush nearby. I lured Li Mo here on purpose, so you could take the opportunity to kill him. Then we will immediately lead the army into the palace and support Third Brother to become the emperor." At first, those experts thought that it was an ambush. But when they heard Wei Wei Bai's words, their eyes flashed with fanaticism. They immediately pulled out their swords and attacked Li Mo. Li Mo stood there in a daze. He slowly bit his lower lip, the last trace of hope in his eyes. Finally, it was completely gone. He smiled helplessly, as if he was lost and helpless. Just as those people's swords were about to cut into his body, Li Mo unsheathed his sword. Blood colder than snow splashed out. For a moment, he thought that if he died under these people's swords. Download the https://www.sashu.com/download the full article. https://www.sashu.com download the full article. https://www.sashu.com download the full article. https://m.sashu.com. Chapter 23:18. Would she feel bad for him? No. Since the day he betrayed her and took everything from her, she would never forgive him. Li Mo laughed. Why couldn't he wait? Why did he give her that poison? Everyone knew that the old emperor was dying. If he wanted to seize power, he only needed to wait for a month or two, and the old emperor would die. At that time, when he rebelled, Wei might not hate him, because he didn't let her kill her father, even if it exposed that he used her in the beginning to support the fourth prince's ambition. He could also win her heart back, because she loved him the most. Li Mo regretted it, so much so that his intestines turned green. He did something so stupid that he lost the one he loved. Li Mo had a few more wounds on his body, but he rarely showed his martial arts. Today these people met his sword head-on. He didn't hold back at all. All the masters who attacked him died on the spot. Wei Wei Bai's eyes dimmed with disappointment as those people died. Li Mo was covered in blood, but he held his sword expressionlessly, walking towards her step by step. Wei Wei Bai pursed her lips, watching him walk over. Above Li Mo's head, the fourth star lit up. Wei Wei Bai said, "Tongzi, I think Li Mo is going to kill me." The system said, "Don't worry. I'll give you a life guarantee. You won't die even if you get cut a few more times." Wei Wei Bai's mouth twitched, trying to maintain her image as a cold and fearless little fairy. Her face was pale, more beautiful than the snow, but her eyes were too cold, sharper than his blood-stained sword. Little Six saw Li Mo coming, and was so scared his legs turned to jelly. But he thought of something and immediately knelt in front of Wei Wei Bai. He opened his weak hands and shouted in fear, "Don't come over, don't hurt the princess." After days of being together, Little Six's favorability had soared to 95. Look at Li Mo's 80. She used all her heart and risked her life to get it. Then he looked at Little Six's 95. She didn't do anything other than reveal her peerless beauty. Wei Wei Bai felt that Xiaolu's obsession with looks was beyond cure. She and Li Mo felt inferior. Li Mo's footsteps paused. His eyes lost all signs of life, as if he was a puppet from hell, exceptionally terrifying. His hand that was holding the sword trembled. Seeing a broken sword, Little Six immediately picked it up and pointed it at Li Mo in fear. Don't come any closer or I'll kill you. He was clearly powerless, but he was like an ant trying to shake a tree, or a mantis trying to stop a chariot. He couldn't even hold a broken sword properly, but he still tried so hard to protect her. Liam suddenly felt like laughing. Even a spy could fall in love with her and risk his life for her. She had never lacked love. He was the one who cheated her of her feelings. He cheated her by forbidding others from seeing her face, and forbidding her from treating others well. By the time he managed to get his hands on her, he had lost her. Liam looked at Wei Wei Bai pitifully. Do you think I would harm you? Wei Wei Bai's face paled, looking even weaker. But her voice was still calm and cruel. Have you never harmed me? Liam's eyes flashed with panic. He held the sword tightly but couldn't refute. Wei Wei Bai smiled weakly. You're ridiculous. I won't forgive you. I won't love you. If you want to imprison me, I will harm you as long as I'm by your side. Liam's eyes were filled with desolation as he looked at her sadly. Wei Wei Bai coldly looked up at the last star above his head. / for your convenience next time. You can click on the below to record this reading. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support. And don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.